What's up, guys? You ready for another round of classic, crazy, and mind blowing Reddit stories? Your boy CrumbleBob's got a fresh lineup just for you. But real quick, smash that like, hit subscribe. It means the world for the channel's growth. Okay, let's dive right in. So, this happened 3 weeks ago, and I'm still getting messages from her and her friends about how I need to talk to her and work things out. But honestly, I think I handled this exactly right, and I don't see why everyone thinks I'm the bad guy here. My girlfriend Sarah and I have been together for 2 years and 3 months. We're both 26. And up until this whole situation unfolded, I thought we were quite solid. We live about 40 minutes apart, which isn't ideal, but we make it work. She has this friend group from college that she's really close with, and I've always been fine with that because everyone needs their friends, right? But now I can see there were warning signs I should have noticed earlier. The friend group is like 6 people total, 3 girls and 3 guys, and they all went to the same state school together and have known each other since freshman year. The guys are Marcus, Tyler, and Josh. And honestly, Marcus always bothered me, but I never said anything because I'm not the kind of boyfriend who tries to control who his girlfriend spends time with. Marcus is one of those guys who thinks he's funnier than he actually is, and he's always making comments that walk right up to the line of being inappropriate, but never quite cross it. You know what I mean? Like he'll say something about how Sarah looks nice in a certain outfit, but then state it's just his honest opinion as a friend, or he'll joke about how lucky I am to have her, but in a way that implies I don't deserve her. Tyler and Josh are fairly normal guys. Tyler's been with his girlfriend, Emma, for about 4 years, and Josh is single, but he's not one to cause drama. He's not. But Marcus has been single for the last year and a half, and ever since his last relationship ended, he's been becoming increasingly odd about boundaries, with all the girls in the group, not just Sarah. The problems truly began about 6 months ago when they all chose to arrange this big vacation to Florida for spring break. I know now they're all friends, and they've been going on group trips together since college, and at first Sarah asked if I wanted to come along. I agreed because I like traveling, and I thought it would be beneficial to spend more time with her friends and get to know them more. But then about 2 weeks later, she approaches me and says, perhaps it would be better if it was just the original friend group this time because they had already finalized all these plans and bookings, assuming it would be the 6 of them. I was somewhat annoyed, but I understand. Sometimes friend groups prefer to do their own activities, and I wasn't going to make an issue out of it. So I agreed, fine, have fun, and I started planning my own trip with my friends for that same week, which, as it turned out, didn't happen, funny enough. But then things started getting strange with how much time Sarah was spending planning this trip. I mean, every single day she was in group chats with them discussing what they were going to do, where they were going to eat, which bars they wanted to visit, what beach activities they had arranged. And I'm talking hours daily, she'd be on her phone, texting in these group chats from the moment she woke up until she went to sleep. When we'd be spending time together, watching a movie or having dinner, she'd continually be checking her phone and replying to messages about the trip. I began to feel as if I was competing with this vacation for her attention, and that's not a pleasant feeling to experience regarding your girlfriend. But I didn't want to be the type of guy who complains about his girlfriend having friends and being excited about a trip, so I remained silent and assumed once the trip concluded, things would return to normal. Then, roughly a month before the trip, Sarah mentions that Marcus had proposed they all have matching t-shirts made for the group. Not merely regular t-shirts, but these personalized ones with, like, an inside joke from college printed on them and all their names on the back, as if they were a sports team or something. She showed me the design, and it was honestly quite cringeworthy. But whatever, if that's what they wish to do, then fine. But then she mentions Marcus also proposed they all get temporary tattoos of the same design to wear during the trip for pictures. And I thought this is getting a bit strange, like you're all 26 years old, not 19. But again, I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be the boyfriend who spoils his girlfriend's fun. The week before the trip, Sarah essentially moved in with me because she said it was simpler to pack and prepare at my place, as I have more room. Except she wasn't really packing. She was spending literally every waking moment on her phone with the group chat. She'd be laying in my bed at night, going through hundreds of messages about the most random things, like if they should bring a cooler to the beach, or what time they should leave for dinner each night. I began to feel invisible in my own house. And that's when I understood. This wasn't merely about her being excited for a trip with friends. This was about her prioritizing everything and everyone related to this trip over our relationship and over me. But I still said nothing, because I kept believing once the trip was over and she got it out of her system, everything would return to normal. The night before they were scheduled to leave, Sarah was rushing around my apartment, packing last-minute items, and she had her phone on speaker, so I could hear the whole group chat conversation. They were all discussing their outfits for a restaurant on the first night, and Marcus continually commented on how he couldn't wait to see all the girls dressed up, and how they would attract attention everywhere they went. Then Marcus specifically said something like, "Sarah, you better bring that black dress. You know the one I'm talking about." And Sarah actually giggled and said, "Oh, I already packed it. Don't worry." And I'm sitting there thinking, what the hell? Why is Marcus talking about my girlfriend's clothes? And why is she giggling about it like they have some kind of inside joke about her dress? The next morning was when everything went completely sideways. Sarah woke up around 6 a.m., even though they weren't leaving until 10, because she wanted to make sure she looked perfect for the trip. She was in my bathroom for 2 straight hours doing her hair and makeup, and I'm not exaggerating when I say 2 hours, because I was lying in bed checking the time every 15 minutes, wondering when she was going to be done. While she's getting ready, she's got her phone propped up on the bathroom counter, and she's video chatting with the girls from the group about their outfits and makeup. So I can hear this entire conversation happening, and it's all about how excited they are, and how this is going to be the best trip ever, and how they've been planning this for months. Then Marcus joins the video call, and he starts saying stuff like, "Ladies, you're all looking beautiful this morning, and I can't wait to see everyone's travel outfits." Sarah's in there laughing and telling him to shut up, but in that flirty way that doesn't actually mean shut up, you know what I mean. I'm growing increasingly annoyed listening to all this, but I'm trying to stay calm about it. So I get up and prepare coffee and breakfast for both of us, hoping we could share a pleasant morning before she departs for her trip. I call to her from the kitchen to say breakfast is ready, and she yells back that she'll be out shortly. 20 minutes later, she's still in the bathroom, and now they're all discussing some bar they want to visit the first night, with Marcus saying he's excited to be Sarah's wingman if any guys try to flirt with her at the bar. And Sarah says something like, "I can handle myself, but thanks for looking out for me." And they're all laughing about it. That's when I begin thinking this is becoming absurd. So I go to the bathroom door, knock, and tell her breakfast is getting cold, asking if she could perhaps finish getting ready so we can spend a little time together before she departs. She opens the door just enough to poke her head out and tells me she's nearly done. But this is important because they're coordinating their outfits for photos. I tell her I made her favorite breakfast and was hoping we could eat together and perhaps just chat for a bit, since she's going to be away for a week. And she looks at me like I'm being unreasonable and says, "Babe, I'm trying to get ready. Can we talk when I get back?" So I return to the kitchen, and I'm standing there gazing at this lovely breakfast I prepared, growing cold on the counter, and I'm thinking about how I've barely had a genuine conversation with my girlfriend in weeks because she's been so engrossed with arranging this trip. And I'm listening to her in the bathroom, still talking to Marcus and the others about their plans, and I realize I sense I'm a stranger in my own relationship. That's when I concluded I needed to discuss priorities and communication with her. Not an argument, just a discussion about how I've been feeling distant from her lately, and how I believe we need to put more effort into prioritizing our relationship. So when she finally emerges from the bathroom, looking utterly stunning, I must admit, I tell her she looks beautiful and ask if we could sit and eat breakfast together and discuss a few matters. She immediately checks her phone and mentions the group is about to set off, and she needs to pack her final few items. I tell her I get that she's excited for the trip, but I feel like we haven't truly connected in weeks, and I'd like to discuss that. She's moving about the apartment, grabbing assorted items and stuffing them into her suitcase, and she asks, "What do you mean we haven't connected? We've been spending time together daily." So I clarify that yes, we've been in the same place, but she's been continually on her phone with the group chat, and I feel like her focus has been entirely on this trip instead of on us. I tell her I'm not trying to spoil her enjoyment or make her feel bad for being excited. I just want to ensure our relationship remains a priority for her. That's when she pauses her packing and looks at me with an expression as if I'd just said something utterly unreasonable. She says, "Of course our relationship is a priority, but this trip is happening right now, and I need to concentrate on getting ready. We can discuss relationship matters when I return." I tell her that's precisely what I'm referring to, that she's treating our relationship like something she can simply defer whenever something more exciting arises. And she adopts a defensive tone and says, "That's not what I'm doing. You're being dramatic." So I ask her directly, right now, in this moment, "What's your top priority?" And she doesn't even pause before saying, "Getting ready for this trip and ensuring I don't forget anything important." I ask her where our relationship places on her priority list right now, and she actually has to ponder it for a second before saying, "Our relationship is important, but it's not going anywhere. This trip is only happening once." That's when it struck me hard. She had just told me directly that our relationship wasn't her priority. It wasn't just low on her list. It genuinely wasn't a priority for her at all. She was essentially implying our relationship would always be there, allowing her to disregard it whenever something more enjoyable appeared. I stood there for a moment, absorbing what she'd just said, and understood this wasn't about a single talk or a particular trip. This was about her perception of our whole relationship. I was the secure fallback option, always present, while she gave precedence to everything else that seemed more thrilling or urgent. So I looked at her and replied, "Okay, if that's how you see it, then I understand." She didn't even notice I was upset. She simply said, "Good, I'm glad you understand," and resumed packing. I went to the kitchen and sat at the table with the breakfast I'd made, now totally cold, and began reflecting on everything that had brought us to this point. The months of feeling I was vying with her friends for her attention, the weeks of observing her favor, planning this trip over spending quality time with me, and now her stating plainly that our relationship held no priority for her. And I recognized I was finished. Not necessarily finished with the relationship itself, but finished with being treated as though I were optional. Finished with being the person who was always available only when she had spare time after everything else. So I made a choice right there at the kitchen table. If I wasn't her priority, then I wouldn't behave as though she were mine either. If our relationship could be set aside whenever something more thrilling appeared, then I could do the same. I rose from the table, went to the bedroom, and began packing a bag. Sarah was in the living room, still rushing around, packing and speaking on her phone with the group about their meetup time. I emerged with my bag, and she looked at me, puzzled, asking where I was headed. I informed her I was planning to visit my brother in Denver for several days. She inquired why I was departing right then, just as she was about to leave for her trip, and I replied it appeared to be a good moment since she'd be occupied with her priorities. She questioned if I was bothered about something, and I told her no. I fully grasped her priorities and was merely making my own choices based on that comprehension. She stared at me, as if attempting to discern if I was being sarcastic, but I maintained a completely neutral and factual tone. Then her phone began ringing. It was Marcus calling to inform her they were all gathering at Tyler's house in 30 minutes to load the cars. She answered the call and told him she'd arrive shortly, then hung up and informed me she needed to depart immediately. I wished her a wonderful trip and expressed my hope that she attained everything she was prioritizing. She gave me a brief kiss and mentioned she'd call me once they reached Florida, then collected her bags and departed. The moment her car exited my driveway, I telephoned my brother Jake in Denver. I hadn't spoken to him in about 2 months, but we've always been close, and I knew I could stay at his place for a few days if I needed to escape and reflect. Jake answered, and I informed him I needed to leave town for a few days, asking if I could come stay with him. He could sense something was amiss, as it's not typical for me to spontaneously decide to leave town. But he didn't pose many questions. He simply said, "Of course," and advised me to drive safely. I put my bag in my car and began driving to Denver. It's roughly a 6-hour drive from where I reside, and I had ample time to ponder everything. The more I considered it, the more I understood that Sarah stating I wasn't her priority wasn't merely an impulsive remark. It was her expressing honestly how she truly felt. And I began recalling all the instances over the past few months when I had felt as though I was secondary to other aspects of her life. I arrived at Jake's place around 4 p.m., and he took one glance at me and realized something significant had occurred. He didn't press me to discuss it immediately. He simply opened a beer, offered it to me, and said I could explain what was happening whenever I felt prepared. That evening, we ordered pizza and watched basketball, and I recounted the entire story to him. Jake listened to everything without interruption, and when I finished, he asked, "So what are you going to do?" I told him I honestly wasn't sure. I just knew I needed some room to figure out my feelings about everything. Meanwhile, Sarah's trip was beginning, and I could see on social media that they'd arrived in Florida and were already posting photos from the beach. They seemed to be having a great time, and honestly, good for them. That first night, she messaged me around 11 p.m. her time, saying they'd arrived safely and the hotel was quite nice. I replied, saying that was good, and I was glad they arrived safely. She asked how my day was, and I said it was fine. I was in Denver visiting Jake. She asked why I hadn't told her I planned to visit Jake, and I said it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. She asked why I hadn't told her I planned to visit Jake, and I said it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. She didn't reply after that, and I figured she was likely out at bars with the group. The following morning, I woke up to a message from her with several photos from their first day, pictures of them at the beach, at restaurants, and so on. I looked at all the photos and replied with, "Looks fun," and that was all. This pattern carried on for the next few days. She'd send me photos and updates about what they were doing. I'd reply politely but briefly, and that was the limit of our communication. I could tell she was starting to notice that I wasn't being as engaged as usual, because her texts started growing longer and more detailed, as if she was trying to get me to respond with more than just a few words. Meanwhile, I was having a genuinely good time in Denver with Jake. We went hiking, visited some breweries, and caught up on everything that had been going on in our lives. It was precisely what I needed, and I realized I felt more relaxed and happy than I had in months. Jake and I discussed the Sarah situation a few more times, and he offered me some perspective that truly helped. He said it sounded like Sarah had grown comfortable taking me for granted, and that perhaps some space would help her realize what she was doing. He also said that if someone tells you you're not their priority, you should believe them and act accordingly. On the 4th day of Sarah's trip, she called me instead of simply texting. I was out hiking with Jake, so I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail saying she missed me and asking if everything was all right because I seemed different in my texts. She said she wanted to have a genuine conversation and asked me to call her back. I wasn't ready to have a lengthy conversation, so I didn't call her back that day. That night she called again, and this time I picked up. She promptly asked if I was angry about something, and I replied that I wasn't angry. I was just giving her space. She fell silent for a moment, and then asked what I meant by that. So I explained I wasn't angry. I was just giving her space. She paused again and then asked what I meant by that. So I brought up our earlier talk before she left, when she told me our relationship wasn't her current priority. I mentioned I respected that and was just aligning my expectations accordingly. She started to say something about how I was misinterpreting that conversation, but then I could hear Marcus in the background mentioning going to dinner, and she said she needed to leave, but we'd speak again later. That phone call totaled about 5 minutes. The next day, I chose to prolong my visit in Denver. I was meant to drive home that day, but I was enjoying myself so much with Jake, and I realized there was no need to hurry back. Sarah's trip didn't conclude until Sunday, and I was savoring this personal time to reflect on what I desired from a relationship. So I inquired if I could work remotely for a few more days, and luckily my boss was fine with it, as I don't typically request time off, and I could manage most of my tasks from any location with internet access. That's when Sarah began to notice something was genuinely different. She texted me, inquiring when I was heading home, and I informed her I had opted to remain in Denver a bit longer since I was enjoying myself. She called me right away and asked what was happening and why I was extending my trip without discussing it with her. I told her I was doing precisely what she did, making choices based on my priorities without consulting her beforehand. She claimed that was entirely different, because she had arranged her trip months ahead, and I had merely randomly chosen to depart town. So I asked her what the distinction was, and she couldn't genuinely provide a satisfactory answer. She just continued stating it was different, and that I was acting strange and remote. I told her I wasn't acting strange. I was being truthful about my position and modifying my behavior as appropriate. The discussion grew a little intense because she kept asserting that I was misinterpreting what she intended when she stated our relationship wasn't her priority. She claimed she merely meant that at that precise moment, she had to concentrate on preparing for her trip. But I reminded her that she had been prioritizing the trip and everything connected to it for months, not solely that single morning. She became defensive and stated I was being unjust, and that she was permitted to be excited about a trip with her friends. I told her she was perfectly fine to be excited and prioritize anything she wished, but she couldn't expect me to simply wait around for her to make time for me once everything else was handled. That's when she said something that truly affirmed everything I had been considering. She said, "I don't grasp why this is such an issue. You know I care for you, and our relationship is strong. So why can't you just back me up while I enjoy myself with my friends?" And I realized she truly failed to comprehend the issue. In her mind, since she cared for me and our relationship was strong, she believed she could treat it as less significant than everything else, because it would consistently be there. She viewed our relationship as so stable that it required no attention. I told her that love was insufficient if it wasn't supported by actions and decisions. I said that informing someone they're not your priority, and then anticipating them to be fine with that simply because you love them, isn't how healthy relationships function. She fell silent and then mentioned she needed to ponder what I was saying. I told her that was perfectly acceptable. She should take all the time she required to reflect, and that I was continuing to relish my time in Denver. The remainder of her trip felt odd. She continued to text me intermittently, but the tone had shifted, as if she was probing to see how I would react. She would send me photos, and I would reply courteously, but I wasn't engaging as I once did. I wasn't asking follow-up questions or remarking on how enjoyable everything seemed. I was responding to her updates as I would to those from any casual acquaintance. All the while, I was having a fantastic time in Denver. Jake and I went to a Rockies game. We visited some museums. We went to this amazing restaurant in the mountains. I shared a few photos on social media, and I could see that Sarah was viewing all of them right after I posted them. On the last day of her trip, she called me and said she had been thinking about our talk, and she wished to speak when she got home. I let her know that was fine, but I didn't plan to be home when she returned, because I was still enjoying my time in Denver. She asked when I intended to come home, and I told her I wasn't certain yet, maybe in a few more days. She said she really wanted to see me and speak in person about everything. I told her I understood, but I intended to finish my time here first. That's when she began to sound a little panicked. She asked if I was planning to end things with her, and I told her I wasn't planning anything. I was simply taking things one day at a time and enjoying my priorities. She caught the emphasis I put on priorities and grew quiet. She said she was starting to understand that she had hurt my feelings and wanted to make it right. I told her it wasn't about hurt feelings. It was about incompatible approaches to relationships. She asked what I meant, and I explained she viewed our relationship as something secure that could be set aside whenever something more engaging appeared, whereas I saw relationships as needing consistent focus and prioritization to thrive. She said she had never considered it that way and inquired if we could discuss it further when she got home. I told her we could talk whenever she wished, but I intended to keep doing my own activities until I felt prepared for that discussion. Sarah returned home from her trip on Sunday, and I could see from her social media that she made it back safely. She messaged me that night saying she was back and asking when I thought I might be ready to speak. Monday morning, she began phoning me repeatedly. I picked up one of the calls and she was weeping, stating she couldn't stop pondering our discussion and realized she had been taking me for granted. She said she wished to mend things and inquired when I would be returning. I told her I valued her taking the moment to reflect on everything, but I required more time to digest on my part. She asked how much time, and I replied I wasn't sure, for as long as it takes. That's when she truly began to fret. She said she couldn't grasp why I was prolonging this, and why I wouldn't simply return home so we could resolve matters. I told her I was doing precisely what she did. She claimed it wasn't the same thing, and I asked her to clarify the distinction. She couldn't provide a clear answer. She just kept asserting it was different, and that she had to see me. I remained in Denver for 2 more days, and throughout that period, Sarah was constantly bombarding my phone. She was messaging me lengthy texts about how apologetic she was and how she understood she had been mistaken about prioritizing the trip over our relationship. She was phoning several times daily, inquiring when I would be returning. However, here's what truly confirmed everything for me. While Sarah was sending me all these communications about how sorry she was and how much she missed me, I could observe from social media that she was spending time with Marcus and Tyler and Joshua. They were sharing photos from dinners and bars, seemingly extending the vacation atmosphere now that they were back home. So she was telling me how much she missed me and how she wished to mend our relationship. But she was still giving precedence to spending time with the same individuals who had been more significant than me for months. It validated everything I had been contemplating regarding her approach to relationships. When I eventually drove back home on Wednesday, I didn't inform Sarah I was arriving. I simply appeared at my apartment and began resuming my usual routine. She messaged me that evening inquiring if I was available to speak, and I informed her I was home. She arrived within 40 minutes, and she appeared as though she hadn't slept a great deal. She immediately began apologizing and saying she now grasped she had been mistaken. She said she wished to make alterations and properly prioritize our relationship. I heard all she had to say, and then I told her I valued her apologies, but I required actions, not merely words. I said that over the past week, I had experienced what it was like to be someone's true priority, meaning my own, and I understood I had been accepting far less than I merited. She inquired what I intended, and I told her that Jake had set aside everything to make time for me when I needed it, that he had been completely engaged when we spent time together, rather than continually checking his phone, and that he had made me feel appreciated and significant simply by offering his complete attention. I said that's what I desired from a romantic relationship too. Sarah stated she grasped this and wished to be that individual for me. I told her I wished that were true, but I required to observe it consistently over time, not just when she was fearful of losing me. We spoke for a few more hours, and she repeatedly asked what she might do to rectify matters. I told her there was nothing particular she could do. She simply had to determine her true priorities and then match her actions accordingly. She said our relationship was her priority, and I told her that was reassuring to hear, but the true test would be her future conduct, not what she expressed in this discussion. That was 3 weeks ago, and honestly, not much has changed. Sarah has been making a real effort to spend more time with me and show more attention, but it feels forced and short-lived. It's like she's acting her best because she fears I might leave. Not because her view on relationships has truly shifted, and she's still constantly spending time with Marcus, Tyler, and Josh. Just last week, they all went to a concert together, and Sarah spent the whole day before it texting in their group chat about what to wear and where to meet. It was like a rerun of the vacation situation. When I mentioned this to her, she said it was just one concert, not the same as the vacation. But I could see that same intense energy from her, planning and coordinating with the group, always checking her phone. So I told her I believed we should take a break. Not necessarily break up, but just stop pretending things were fine when they clearly weren't. She panicked and said she'd been trying so hard, and it wasn't fair for me to abandon us. I told her I wasn't giving up. I was being realistic about our differences. She views relationships as something available whenever she's ready to focus on them, while I view relationships as needing constant prioritization to thrive. She claimed she could change, saying she now understood what I needed from her. However, then Marcus messaged her during our talk, and she instantly checked her phone and replied. When I noted she had just proved my point, she claimed it was only a brief reply and meant nothing. It was then I understood nothing was truly going to change. She might be more conscious of the problem now, but her instincts and inherent behavior remained the same. She would still prioritize whatever seemed most urgent or exciting at the moment, and expect our relationship to simply wait for her whenever she was prepared to focus on it. So I told her I believed we should formally break up. She started crying and pleaded with me to reconsider, saying she'd do anything to make it work. I told her the issue wasn't that she wouldn't do anything, but that she fundamentally didn't grasp what needed to be done. Since then, she's been constantly texting me, calling me, and showing up at my apartment. She involved her friends, and they've been messaging me, saying I'm too harsh and that she truly loves me and just made some errors. But here's what's truly revealing. Even now, while she's allegedly fighting for our relationship, she's still prioritizing her group chat with Marcus and the others. I can see from social media that they're all arranging another trip for next month, and Sarah's involved in all the planning conversations. So she's claiming our relationship is her top priority, while at the same time arranging another vacation with the same individuals who previously took precedence over me. It's as if she gained no insight from this whole situation. I'm no longer replying to her messages because I believe I've expressed all I needed to. I told her explicitly what the issue was, offered her opportunities to resolve it, and she's demonstrated through her conduct that she's neither able nor willing to make the adjustments required for us to succeed. Some people are suggesting I managed this poorly, and that I should have expressed my emotions more effectively from the outset instead of leaving for Denver. But I believe I communicated with complete clarity. I told her precisely what I felt and what I needed, and she told me precisely where I stood. Everything that followed was just the direct outcome of that conversation. I don't think I'm wrong for declining to be someone's backup plan. I don't think I'm wrong for wanting to be with someone who opts to prioritize our relationship steadily, not merely when they fear losing it, and I don't think I'm wrong for trusting people when they reveal who they are and what's important to them. So Ida for leaving when my girlfriend indicated I wasn't her priority, and then ending things with her when her conduct didn't genuinely shift. Update 1. Well, Sarah discovered this post. I'm unsure how. Perhaps one of her friends saw it and recognized the story. But she called me utterly furious yesterday morning, demanding to know why I was airing our private business online and making her seem bad to strangers. I told her I didn't use anyone's real names, and I just wanted outside opinions on the situation. She said it didn't matter because anyone who knew us would be able to figure out it was about her. Then she said I was being vindictive and trying to make her look like a bad girlfriend. What's funny is that she was more upset about me posting on Reddit than she ever was about the actual relationship problems. She spent 20 minutes yelling at me about how embarrassed she was that people were calling her names and saying she was a terrible girlfriend, but she didn't spend any time discussing the real issue. Then she said something that truly confirmed I made the right decision to end things. She said, "I can't believe you're letting a bunch of strangers on the internet convince you to throw away 2 years together." I told her that strangers on the internet didn't convince me of anything. Her own words and actions did. I said that if she was more concerned about how she looked to random people online than she was about how she treated me in our relationship, that pretty much proved everything I'd been saying. She hung up on me after that, but then she texted me a few hours later, saying she wanted to meet in person to talk without an audience. I told her I didn't believe there was anything more to discuss and that I was moving on. That's when things got really weird. She arrived at my place about 8 in the evening, carrying a bottle of wine and a takeout bag from my top restaurant. She mentioned wanting to prepare a meal for me and spend a pleasant night together, just like old times. I informed her I valued the effort, but I wasn't at ease with her simply appearing without an invitation, particularly since we had ended our relationship. She began to weep, stating she missed me and felt certain she could mend things if I would only grant her a further opportunity. But here's what truly struck me. As she stood there crying and expressing how much she longed for me, her phone kept vibrating non-stop with alerts, and from her lock screen I could tell it was the group conversation involving Marcus and the rest. Even amidst her significant emotional plea to win me back, she couldn't disregard the group chat. She continually peeked at her phone, and I could tell she was desperate to look at the messages. After roughly 10 minutes, she actually uttered, "Sorry, I should probably check this. It might be important," and then glanced at her phone. I simply began to laugh, as it was so utterly characteristic of her. She was attempting to persuade me that I was her main concern, yet she was literally putting her phone and her friends ahead of our discussion concerning our relationship. I informed her she ought to leave, and that this entire exchange had simply solidified my choice to break up. She became upset and claimed I was being unjust and searching for excuses to remain separated. I replied that I didn't need to search for reasons. She was providing me with new ones in real time. She finally departed around 9 p.m., though not before telling me I would regret abandoning someone who loved me as much as she did. I informed her that if this was what love appeared to be from her perspective, then our definitions of love were vastly different. Since then, she's been sending me screenshots of comments from people defending her on the post, as if that's meant to alter my opinion on anything. She forwarded one comment that said something like, "Everyone deserves to have fun with their friends," and she added, "See, not everyone thinks I'm a terrible person." I haven't responded to any of these messages because I believe she's entirely missing the point. Nobody suggested she was a terrible person for wanting to enjoy time with her friends. The issue was that she consistently prioritized everything else over our relationship and then became upset when I stopped accepting that treatment. Also, and this is likely the most telling aspect, I discovered from Tyler's girlfriend Emma that Sarah has been recounting a completely different version of this story. According to Emma, Sarah has been claiming that I grew jealous about her trip and issued an ultimatum, and when she wouldn't cancel her vacation, I broke up with her out of spite. That's not even close to what actually transpired, but it reveals to me that Sarah still doesn't comprehend or won't admit what she truly did wrong. Emma also shared something interesting with me. Emma mentioned that throughout the Florida trip, Sarah was continuously checking her phone and appeared preoccupied, as if something back home was bothering her. Emma inquired about it, and Sarah stated she was worried I was acting strangely regarding the trip. Thus, Sarah was aware I was unhappy and that issues existed, yet rather than dealing with them, she simply wished they would resolve themselves. Then when I ceased tolerating being treated as secondary, She behaved as though it was completely unexpected. I believe I'm finished with this entire circumstance. Sarah is free to recount any version of the narrative that makes her feel better, but I understand what truly occurred, and I am content with my choice. Now, on to a story that will leave you speechless. So my wife Sarah and I have been married for 8 years, and we have a 6-year-old son named Marcus. I'm 32, she's 29, and we live in Ohio, where I work as a network administrator for a mid-sized company and make good money, around $75K. Sarah worked part-time at a dental office until roughly 2 years ago, when she decided to stay home with Marcus full-time, which I supported, as childcare costs were eating up most of her paycheck anyway, and we could manage on my income. Everything seemed normal until around 6 months ago, when Sarah started acting differently. Not dramatically different, where she's suddenly a completely new person, but small things that accumulated. She was constantly on her phone, which wasn't odd since everyone's on their phone, but she'd turn it face down when I entered the room, or bring it with her to the bathroom. She began staying up later, claiming she was watching Netflix or reading articles online. But when I'd glance over, she'd swiftly switch screens. She also began speaking about how she felt she was losing herself in motherhood and marriage, which I understand, because being a stay-at-home parent is challenging work. I told her we could explore getting her some time for hobbies, or perhaps she could return to work part-time if she wished. The truth is, I am not one to jump to conclusions or become easily paranoid. I've always been quite direct about problems, and I reasoned if something was truly wrong, we'd discuss it like adults. But Sarah kept offering me these indefinite answers about needing space to reflect and ascertain what she wanted from life. I proposed marriage counseling, and she replied maybe later. She just needed time to process her feelings first. Then, roughly 4 months ago, Sarah came to me and said she needed a break from our marriage. Not a divorce, just a break to find herself and ascertain her desires. She mentioned she felt stifled and needed time to recall who she was before she became a wife and mother. She wished to move back in with her parents for a few weeks, perhaps a month, and take Marcus with her so she could get some distance but still be a mom. Her parents live about 40 minutes away in a smaller town, so it wasn't like she was asking to move across the state or anything. I wasn't enthusiastic about this idea because breaks in marriage often mean someone's already disengaged or there's someone else involved. But Sarah maintained it was just about her needing space and not about me or our marriage specifically. She stated she still loved me but felt lost and needed time away from our routine to clear her head. I informed her I thought it was a poor idea and that we should work on things together, but she was firm that she needed this break to save our marriage in the long run. So I consented to the break, primarily because I didn't want to be the controlling husband who wouldn't let his wife have space when she was clearly grappling with something. Sarah gathered her and Marcus's belongings and returned to her parents' home. We arranged for her to bring Marcus back for weekends with me, and we'd converse every few days to touch base. The plan was intended to be temporary, perhaps 4 or 6 weeks at most. The first week was unusual because the house seemed empty, and I missed Marcus's presence for his usual bedtime routine and weekend pastimes. Sarah would message me updates about Marcus's well-being and send pictures, which was pleasant, but our phone conversations were uncomfortable and superficial. She'd inquire about work, and I'd ask about her parents and Marcus, but we weren't truly discussing us, or the break, or what she was discovering about herself. By the second week, I observed Sarah was posting more frequently on social media, which was odd because she'd never been a big Facebook or Instagram person. She was sharing photos of herself at coffee shops, hiking trails, and local events, consistently with captions discussing exploration and new discoveries. Some of the pictures were evidently captured by another person because she was in them, but she never brought up spending time with friends or who was capturing the images. When I inquired about it during one of our phone calls, she said she was simply attempting to go out more and encounter new individuals. maybe form some friendships since she'd been isolated from being home with Marcus constantly. By the third week, Marcus began inquiring when he was coming home and if his mommy and daddy were divorcing like his friend's parents had. I assured him Mommy just needed some time to visit Grandma and Grandpa, and that we'd all be together again soon, but I was beginning to question if that was accurate. Sarah kept prolonging the break, first stating she needed another week, then 2 more weeks, then perhaps until the end of the month. Each time I pressed for a specific time frame, or asked what precisely she was figuring out, she'd become defensive and say I was pressuring her and not respecting her need for space. That's when I chose to investigate. Sarah's explanations were too imprecise, and her conduct was too dissimilar from the woman I'd been married to for 8 years. I'm quite skilled with computers due to my profession, so I reviewed our phone records and noticed she was texting and calling one particular number significantly more than usual, sometimes for hours at a time and often late at night. The number had a different area code, not from this region or where her parents reside. I reverse searched the number and discovered it belonged to someone named Kevin, who lived in Portland, Oregon. I located his Facebook profile and saw he was 26, unemployed, and according to his posts, residing with his mother while pursuing his music career and expanding his streaming audience. His profile was full of complaints about how hard life was and how nobody understood his artistic vision, plus a lot of angry posts about women and relationships that made me think he wasn't exactly a catch. But here's the kicker. Sarah had been liking and commenting on his posts going back about 7 months, well before she asked for the break. Their interactions started innocently enough, commenting on his music posts and him replying with thanks. But then I could see it escalated to more personal conversations in the comments, before they obviously moved to private messaging and phone calls. I felt sick, realizing my wife's need to find herself was actually about finding some loser in Oregon who spent his days playing video games and complaining about life while his mom paid his bills. But I didn't confront Sarah right away because I needed to think about my next moves, especially regarding Marcus and what this meant for our marriage and custody arrangements. I started taking screenshots of everything I could find, their public interactions on social media, Sarah's posts about exploring new connections and opening her heart to new experiences, and Kevin's posts about finally finding someone who understands him. That lined up perfectly with when Sarah asked for her break. I also printed out our phone records, showing the hundreds of texts and hours of calls between them. While I was gathering evidence, Sarah called to tell me she wanted to extend the break indefinitely and was thinking about making some big changes in her life. She said she'd been doing a lot of soul searching and realized she might be happier in a different environment, maybe somewhere with more opportunities and a different pace of life. When I asked what that meant specifically, she said she was considering moving somewhere new, maybe the West Coast, where she could start fresh and build the life she really wanted. That's when it clicked that Sarah wasn't just having an emotional affair with Kevin. She was planning to move to Oregon to be with him and take Marcus with her. I asked her directly if she was planning to move and take our son away from me, and she said she hadn't made any final decisions, but she needed to consider all her options for building a better future for herself and Marcus. I told her that moving Marcus across the country wasn't an option we'd agreed to when she asked for a break, and she said the break had helped her realize that staying in Ohio wasn't what was best for her or Marcus in the long run. She stated Marcus would gain from new experiences and a different setting, and that I could visit, or perhaps even think about moving to if I wished to be part of their new life. That discussion concluded with me informing Sarah we had to speak face-to-face about these plans, because relocating our son across the country was a significant decision that impacted all of us, not merely her journey of self-discovery. She assented to meet me the following day midway between our home and her parents' residence. The following day I met Sarah and brought printouts of everything I'd discovered, the phone records, screenshots of her social media interactions with Kevin and his public posts about their relationship. I placed the papers on the table and informed her I was aware of Kevin and that her break wasn't about finding herself. It was about having an affair with some man in Oregon who couldn't even support himself. Sarah's face turned completely red, and she began saying it wasn't what I believed, that Kevin was simply a friend who grasped what she was experiencing and that their connection was emotional, not physical. I informed her that didn't matter because she'd been deceiving me for months and was planning to take our son across the country to be with her affair partner without even discussing it with me beforehand. She claimed she hadn't been planning anything specific and was merely exploring her options. But then she began discussing how unhappy she'd been in our marriage and how Kevin made her feel alive and understood in ways I never had. She stated Kevin supported her dreams and encouraged her to think bigger about her life, while I merely wanted her to remain in the same dull routine forever. I told her that was acceptable. She could pursue whatever dreams she desired with Kevin, but she wasn't taking Marcus to Oregon to play house with some jobless guy she met online. Sarah claimed I was being domineering and that she had an equal right to determine what was best for Marcus, as I did. She stated Kevin was actually excellent with children and had been helping her consider how to give Marcus superior opportunities than he'd have in Ohio. That's when I informed Sarah I'd already spoken with a divorce attorney and would be submitting papers by the end of the week. I said if she wanted to move to Oregon to be with Kevin, that was her decision. But Marcus was staying in Ohio with me where he had stability, his school, his friends, and a parent who wasn't chasing online relationships with strangers. Sarah entirely lost her temper and started shouting about how I was trying to control her and keep her from being happy, and that I was using Marcus as a weapon against her. She stated she'd been unhappy for years and eventually found someone who made her feel valued and supported. And now I was attempting to ruin that because I couldn't tolerate her discovering joy outside our marriage. I let her know I wasn't trying to destroy anything. She'd already done that by lying and cheating and planning to uproot our son's life for some guy she'd never even met in person. She conceded they hadn't met face to face yet, but stated that didn't make their bond any less real or meaningful. We exchanged words, with her maintaining that moving to Oregon would be good for Marcus and provide him fresh opportunities, and me highlighting that she sought to move across the country for a guy who was jobless and lived with his mother, which didn't exactly scream stability or improved prospects for our son. The discussion concluded with Sarah stating she wasn't going to let me bully her into staying in a marriage and life that made her miserable, and me informing her she was free to leave, but Marcus wasn't going anywhere. She collected the papers I'd brought and stated she needed time to think about everything, which I found ironic since she'd been doing nothing but thinking for the past 4 months, while lying to me about what she was truly contemplating. That afternoon, I proceeded directly to my attorney's office and filed for divorce, citing adultery and requesting primary custody of Marcus, based on Sarah's intention to relocate him across the country for reasons unrelated to his best interests. My attorney remarked the evidence I'd gathered would be beneficial, particularly the documentation of Sarah's affair and her stated intention to move Marcus away from his established life in Ohio. I also contacted Sarah's parents that evening to inform them of what was happening. They were astonished because Sarah had informed them she simply needed space to sort things out and hadn't mentioned anything about Kevin or moving to Oregon. Her dad was quite distressed that Sarah had also been deceiving them and using their house as a base while she planned to move across the country. Her mom was primarily concerned with Marcus and anxious about how all this would affect him. The next day, Sarah called me, yelling about how I'd blindsided her by filing for divorce and talking to her parents. She claimed she believed we were going to work things out and that filing papers was a nuclear option that would destroy any chance of saving our marriage. I informed her that ship had sailed when she started her affair and began planning to move our son across the country without discussing it with me. She claimed she hadn't made any final decisions about moving and was just exploring possibilities, but I pointed out that she'd already been talking to Kevin about Marcus and how he'd fit into their life together in Oregon. She could not deny that because I had screenshots of Kevin posting about looking forward to meeting the little man and talking about how he was ready to step up and be the father figure Marcus needed. In the following weeks, events unfolded quite rapidly. Sarah retained her own attorney and sought to argue she should have primary custody because she'd served as Marcus's main caregiver for the past 2 years as a stay-at-home mom. However, her attorney couldn't circumvent the fact that Sarah was planning to move Marcus away from his school, friends, and extended family to live with a man she'd encountered online who had no job or secure living arrangement. The court mandated a temporary custody arrangement where Marcus would reside with me during the week and visit Sarah on weekends, but solely within Ohio. Sarah was prohibited from taking Marcus out of state without court permission, which practically ended her plans to move to Oregon, at least for the time being. Sarah was enraged about the custody restrictions and repeatedly contended that I was utilizing the legal system to control her and hinder her from building a new life. She claimed Kevin was encouraging and empathetic about the situation and was even contemplating relocating to Ohio to be closer to her, which I found amusing since he couldn't even afford his own apartment in Oregon, where the cost of living was considerably less than most places in Ohio. Throughout this entire ordeal, I had to explain to Marcus why Mommy and Daddy no longer cohabited and why he wasn't able to visit Grandma and Grandpa as frequently. I kept it straightforward and age-appropriate, explaining to him that sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about important things and need to live separately while they figure things out. Marcus handled it quite well, probably better than Sarah and I did, and appeared relieved to be back in his own room and normal routine. Around 6 weeks after I filed for divorce, Sarah arrived to collect Marcus for her weekend visit and informed me she'd been contemplating our marriage extensively and whether we could resolve matters. She mentioned her connection with Kevin had helped her understand what was lacking in our marriage, but perhaps we could restore our bond if we both made the effort. I informed her I had no interest in rebuilding anything with someone who deceived me for months and attempted to move our son across the country for an affair partner. She claimed the situation with Kevin wasn't truly an affair since they'd never been physical, and that she'd terminated their relationship when she understood it was complicating her ability to co-parent with me efficiently. I inquired if she'd ended it because she recognized it was wrong, or because the custody limitations made it unfeasible for her to move to Oregon, and she couldn't provide a direct response. She continued to evade the question and stating that her priorities had changed now that she grasped how serious the legal situation was. At that point, I realized Sarah hadn't genuinely ended things with Kevin because she recognized her error. She'd simply put their relationship on hold because I'd made it legally unfeasible for her to proceed with her initial plan. She was trying to mend things with me as a fallback, while likely still speaking to Kevin and working out a new way to make their relationship function. I informed Sarah I wasn't keen on being her backup plan, while she determined how to make her affair operate within the limits of our custody agreement. She claimed I was being unjust and not acknowledging her efforts to mend our marriage, but I noted that she'd only grown keen on mending things after her scheme to relocate with Marcus was stopped by the court. The divorce proceedings took roughly a few more months to conclude. Sarah's lawyer attempted various methods to secure her more custody time or authorization to move with Marcus, but none succeeded since she couldn't show that relocating to Oregon would help Marcus in any clear manner. The reality that she wished to relocate to be with a jobless man she'd encountered online didn't aid her case. Ultimately, I received primary physical custody of Marcus, with Sarah having him every other weekend and on alternating holidays. She also needs to pay a modest sum of child support, as I'm covering the majority of Marcus's costs, and she's expected to find employment now that she's no longer at home full-time. The court further mandated that neither of us can move more than 100 miles from our present location without authorization and a custody modification hearing. Sarah relocated to a modest apartment, roughly 20 minutes from our home, and secured employment at a different dental office. She appears to have come to terms with the fact that her Oregon plans won't materialize, at least not in the near future, but I presume she's still in touch with Kevin to some extent. Her social media activity indicates she's still keen on seeking new relationships and remaining receptive to chances, which resembles the very language she employed when she was planning to move across the country. Marcus has adapted nicely to the new setup and appears content to have a steady routine once more. He rarely inquires about the divorce now and has come to terms with the fact that Mom and Dad reside in separate homes, but both care for him deeply. Sarah is a competent mother when her attention is on being a parent rather than pursuing online romances, so I'm pleased Marcus still gets to spend time with her often. This entire experience showed me that when someone requests a break to discover themselves, they've typically already discovered someone else and are merely attempting to determine how to shift into that new relationship without completely wrecking their existing life. I'm not resentful about Sarah opting to end our marriage, because if she was so unhappy, it's better for everyone that we're apart. However, I am upset that she attempted to use Marcus as leverage in her affair and was prepared to disrupt his whole life, so she could pursue some delusion with a man who couldn't even sustain himself, let alone assist in supporting a child. Now I'm concentrating on being the best single dad I can be and ensuring Marcus has stability and consistency in his life. Sarah can chase whatever relationships make her happy, but she's not going to disturb Marcus's life or use him to aid her romantic adventures. So, am I the jerk for initiating divorce proceedings while Sarah was planning to take Marcus across the country, even though she says she was just exploring her options and hadn't made any final decisions? Update 1. Many people requested updates, so this is what has occurred since my original post. Sarah's been adhering to the custody arrangement, and things have been quite uneventful for the past few months. Marcus is performing well in school and seems to have completely adapted to the new routine. Sarah collects him Friday evenings and returns him Sunday nights, and they typically engage in typical children's activities like going to parks, movies, or visiting her parents. But last week an event occurred that validated my doubts about her still being in contact with Kevin. Marcus returned from a weekend visit with Sarah and stated that Mommy's friend Kevin had been on video calls with them. When I inquired of Marcus concerning it, he said Kevin had spoken with him on several occasions and asked him questions about school and what he enjoyed doing for recreation. I promptly phoned Sarah and questioned her regarding Kevin talking to our son during her custody time. She attempted to minimize it and stated Kevin was simply being amiable and that it wasn't a major issue since they were merely video chatting. I informed her I didn't want an unfamiliar person from Oregon speaking to Marcus, particularly not the man she'd been having an affair with. Sarah became defensive and claimed Kevin was no longer a stranger as they'd been conversing for nearly a year, and that he was truly keen on being a part of her life, which involved getting to know Marcus. She mentioned Kevin had been inquiring about Marcus for months, and she believed it would be pleasant for them to connect, even if only via video chat. I informed Sarah that Kevin getting acquainted with Marcus was not her choice to make on her own, particularly as our custody decree stated that neither of us could introduce Marcus to romantic partners without first discussing it. She claimed Kevin wasn't technically a romantic partner because they'd never met face-to-face, and their relationship was complex due to the distance and legal circumstances. It was then I understood Sarah was still intending to make things function with Kevin in some way, despite her inability to relocate to Oregon anymore. She'd likely been informing Kevin about the custody limitations, and they were attempting to devise alternative methods to construct their relationship, including involving Kevin with Marcus to observe how they'd all interact. I informed Sarah that any future contact between Kevin and Marcus had to cease immediately, and that if I discovered she was still enabling discussions between them, I would return to court to amend the custody arrangement. She claimed I was being controlling and attempting to dictate who she could speak with and who Marcus could encounter. But I highlighted that shielding Marcus from my ex-wife's affair partner wasn't controlling, it was acting as a responsible parent. Sarah consented to end the video calls, but mentioned she believed I was overreacting and that Kevin was actually a positive influence who could potentially benefit Marcus if their relationship grew further. I informed her that wasn't going to occur and that she had to accept that her affair with Kevin wasn't going to evolve into some blended family situation involving our son. The discussion concluded with Sarah stating she grasped my concerns, but felt I was being unfair to Kevin, who had been nothing but supportive and kind throughout this entire situation. I informed her Kevin's support of her affair and her plan to relocate Marcus across the country didn't make him a good person. It made him someone prepared to help break up a family for his own advantage. I've been keeping closer watch on Marcus's weekends with Sarah and asking him additional questions about what they do and who they speak with. So far, it appears the video calls with Kevin have ceased, but I'm monitoring the situation closely because I don't trust Sarah to uphold those boundaries long term. Update 2. Roughly a month ago, Sarah began inquiring about altering our custody arrangement to grant her more time with Marcus during the summer. She stated she wished to take him on an extended vacation and perhaps visit some locations they'd never been to together. When I inquired about specifics, she was unclear about their destination and the duration of their absence. Then 2 weeks ago, Marcus returned home from a weekend visit and noted that Mommy had been talking about taking a big trip to see mountains and that they might visit someone who had been wanting to meet him for a long time. When I pressed Marcus for additional details, he stated Sarah had shown him photos of mountains and a large house, and that the individual they might visit was Mommy's special friend who resides far away. I instantly realized Sarah was planning to take Marcus to Oregon to meet Kevin, despite our custody agreement, which forbade her from taking him out of state without court authorization. I telephoned Sarah that evening and confronted her regarding it, and she conceded she'd been considering taking Marcus to Oregon for a week during his summer vacation so he could experience a different part of the country and meet Kevin face to face. I informed Sarah that wasn't going to occur and reminded her about the custody limitations, but she stated she believed those were merely temporary while we were getting divorced, and that now that everything was finalized, she should be able to travel with Marcus during her custody period. I clarified that the travel restrictions were part of our permanent custody order, not merely temporary divorce proceedings. Sarah became frustrated and stated she felt I was holding Marcus confined in Ohio and hindering him from gaining new experiences. She mentioned Kevin had been anticipating meeting Marcus for months and had been arranging activities they might do collectively, including hiking and visiting a certain music studio where Kevin reportedly does his recording. I informed Sarah I was unconcerned with what Kevin had been organizing because he would not be meeting Marcus, full stop. She claimed I was being irrational and that Marcus deserved to know the people who mattered in her life, particularly someone who could become a lasting element of their future. That's when Sarah confessed that she and Kevin had been discussing his relocation to Ohio rather than her relocating to Oregon. She stated Kevin was prepared to move to be nearer to her and Marcus, and that they'd been talking about him securing employment in our area so they might establish a life together in this location. I inquired of Sarah if she genuinely believed Kevin's move from Oregon to Ohio would materialize, given he couldn't even secure employment in his own city and was residing with his mother. She mentioned Kevin was motivated to implement changes in his life now that he possessed something tangible to strive for, and that having Sarah and Marcus in his life would provide him with the steadiness and objective he required to achieve greater success. This entire discussion made me understand that Sarah hadn't abandoned her relationship with Kevin whatsoever. They had simply shifted their approach from her relocating to Oregon to him relocating to Ohio. She was likely still intending to introduce them during the summer journey, but now it would be presented as Kevin exploring Ohio as a possible place to move, instead of Sarah and Marcus visiting him in Oregon. I informed Sarah that Kevin wasn't relocating to Ohio, and that Marcus wouldn't be meeting him, whether it occurred here or in Oregon or any other location. She claimed I couldn't dictate who she dated or who she presented Marcus to indefinitely, and that eventually Kevin would become a part of their lives, whether I approved or not. I concluded the discussion by telling Sarah that if she removed Marcus from the state without court authorization, I would have her apprehended for custodial interference and would aim to have her custody rights revoked. She claimed I was threatening her and acting maliciously, but I told her I was safeguarding our son from her persistent poor judgment concerning this affair. The following day, I contacted my attorney and informed him about Sarah's intentions to take Marcus to Oregon and her continuing relationship with Kevin. He stated we could file for a custody alteration to make the travel limitations even clearer and potentially lessen Sarah's custody time if she persisted in attempting to breach the current order. We submitted a motion requesting the court to specify that Sarah could not take Marcus out of state for any reason without written court approval, and asking for her to be found in contempt if she kept arranging unauthorized travel with him. We also asked for Sarah to be made to provide thorough travel plans for any overnight trips with Marcus, even within Ohio. Sarah's attorney submitted a reply claiming that the initial custody order was overly strict and that Sarah ought to be permitted to travel with Marcus during her custody time, provided she gave reasonable notice. They asserted that stopping Sarah from taking Marcus on vacations was detrimental to their bond and Marcus's development. The hearing took place last week, and Sarah was required to testify about her relationship with Kevin and her plans to take Marcus to Oregon. Sworn in, she admitted she'd been in consistent communication with Kevin throughout our entire divorce process, and that they'd been arranging for him to meet Marcus for months. She also admitted that Kevin relocating to Ohio was a possibility they'd discussed seriously. The judge was not impressed with Sarah's honesty or judgment. He noted that she'd been deceptive about ending her relationship with Kevin and had been intending to violate the custody order by taking Marcus out of state without permission. He also noted that introducing Marcus to her affair partner was not in Marcus's best interests and demonstrated poor parental judgment. The judge altered our custody order to make it explicit that Sarah cannot take Marcus outside of Ohio without previous written court consent, and that breaching this would lead to instant revocation of her custody rights. He also mandated that Sarah not introduce Marcus to any romantic partners without initially informing me and the court, and that such introductions should be progressive and in Marcus's best interests. Sarah was incensed about the new limitations and said the judge was likening her to a lawbreaker instead of a mother attempting to forge a new life. Outside the courthouse, she told me this wasn't finished and that she'd discover a method to foster a connection between Kevin and Marcus that didn't breach the court order. I told Sarah she had to acknowledge that Kevin would not be involved in Marcus's life, and that persisting in this endeavor would merely lead to her losing more custody time. She said Kevin wasn't departing, and that I'd have to become accustomed to the notion that he would be a permanent fixture in her life. Since the hearing, Sarah has been adhering to the altered custody order, but I can perceive her displeasure about it. Marcus hasn't spoken of further video calls with Kevin, but I presume Sarah is simply being more discreet about concealing their communication instead of truly ceasing it. I'm ready to continue contesting this in court should it be required. because I will not permit Sarah to leverage Marcus to advance her relationship with some man she encountered online. Marcus warrants steadiness and consistency, not to be pulled into his mother's romantic drama with a stranger from across the country. So that's how matters are at present. Sarah continues to see Marcus on alternate weekends, but under far more rigorous rules regarding travel and introducing him to new people. I believe she's still intending to find a way to make things work with Kevin, yet at least I now possess improved legal safeguards to prevent her from involving Marcus in that relationship. Next story. This whole situation began around 2 years back when my wife Leslie and I faced some difficult periods in our marriage. We'd been married for 6 years by then, and life had grown quite ordinary. You understand how it is when you're both employed full-time and simply going through the motions. Leslie worked as a marketing coordinator, and I'm an electrician, so our timetables differed greatly, and we weren't spending much time together regardless. I should probably note that Leslie and I had been attempting to conceive for about 3 years without success. We'd undergone some basic fertility tests, and everything appeared normal for both of us, so the doctors simply advised us to keep trying and perhaps consider IVF later on. This placed considerable strain on our relationship because Leslie truly wished to be a mother, and I could observe how much it troubled her each month when we'd face disappointment once more. Around this period, Leslie began to socialize more with her colleagues after work, which honestly I was content with as she appeared happier and more outgoing. Her company had employed this new individual, Russell, who was some kind of consultant or similar, and Leslie would occasionally bring him up when discussing work matters. He was reportedly quite successful and had worked for some major companies in California prior to relocating to our city. I didn't give it much thought initially because Leslie had consistently been amiable with her colleagues. But then Leslie began working late more often and going to these company events that seemed to happen every other week. She would come home talking about how Russell had such engaging stories about his travels and his business ventures, and how he was thinking about starting his own company soon. I began to notice she was dressing up more for work too, as if she was putting additional effort into her appearance. But when I'd compliment her, she would just dismiss it. The initial clear warning sign was when Leslie returned home from one of these company gatherings, behaving quite strangely and playfully. She continually checked her phone and grinned at it, and when I asked what was so amusing, she said it was just some internal work joke that I wouldn't grasp. That unsettled me because Leslie had never previously been secretive regarding her phone. We'd always been quite transparent about such matters. Throughout the subsequent months, Leslie grew increasingly remote. She would return home from work and head directly to her laptop or phone, instead of discussing our days with me as we once did. Whenever I attempted to arrange date nights or propose we do something jointly on weekends, she would consistently offer some reason about being tired or having engagements with colleagues. The most difficult aspect was that our intimate life essentially vanished entirely, and when I tried to initiate anything, she would claim she was stressed from work or felt unwell. I brought it up with her on several occasions, but she'd simply respond that I was being paranoid and that she was dealing with much due to work pressure and the entire fertility thing. She'd turn it around and state I wasn't providing sufficient support, and that perhaps if I displayed greater interest in her career and her friendships, she wouldn't feel like she had to keep everything separate. So I stepped back, but I sensed that something was genuinely amiss. Then roughly a year and a half prior, Leslie returned from work one day, and she appeared changed, as if she were radiant or similar. She seemed simultaneously excited and apprehensive, and she continually fiddled with her hands. Eventually, she had me sit down and said she had significant news to share. My initial idea was perhaps she'd received a promotion or similar advancement given her behavior. However, she informed me she was pregnant. I was stunned since we hadn't been intimate for weeks, but my immediate response was sheer delight because this was what we had been attempting for such an extended period. I leapt up to embrace her and began discussing how incredible this was and how we had to phone our families and commence preparations. But Leslie did not return my embrace, and she wore a strange look on her face that I couldn't interpret. It was then she stated the child might not be biologically mine. I simply stood there gazing at her because I was unable to comprehend her words. She began speaking very quickly about how she'd made an error and had been seeing someone from work, and how she was sorry but felt compelled to be truthful with me now that she was pregnant. She said she'd been involved in an affair with Russell for about 4 months, and they'd been incautious on several occasions. I asked her if she wanted to resolve matters, and if we could get a paternity test to ascertain the situation, because regardless of everything, I still loved her and wished to attempt to preserve our marriage. But then she uttered something that utterly caught me off guard. She said she didn't believe a paternity test was necessary, because she had a powerful sense the baby was Russell's. When I asked her what that signified, she said she simply possessed this intuition regarding it, as if she could sense the baby was Russell's, because their bond was far more profound than what she and I shared. She said when they were with each other, she experienced this spiritual and emotional connection that she'd never encountered previously, and that she simply knew deep down that this child was destined to be his. I told her that was utterly irrational, and that intuition does not establish paternity. But she became quite defensive and said I wouldn't comprehend, because Russell and I were entirely distinct kinds of men. She said Russell was more emotionally astute and spiritually conscious, and that when you have that sort of bond with someone, you simply perceive things at a more profound level. At this juncture, I was growing angry because she was discussing this other man as if he were some kind of enlightened individual, while essentially implying I was too simple to grasp their cosmic connection. I told her we were getting a paternity test whether she approved or not, because I had a right to know if I was going to be a father. But Leslie declined. She mentioned she didn't wish to subject the baby to needless stress, and that she felt certain about the father's identity. She added that Russell had consented to step up and accept responsibility, and that they intended to be a family. She expressed hope that we could divorce peacefully, and that perhaps someday I'd comprehend that this was all destined to occur in this manner. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My spouse of 6 years was seated there informing me she was deserting me for a different man, that she was expecting his child, and that she was grounding all of this on some sort of mystical sensation she possessed. When I indicated that she might be mistaken and that I could actually be the father, she merely shook her head and stated her intuition was always accurate concerning significant matters. So that's how my marriage ended. Leslie relocated the following week to reside with Russell, who seemingly possessed a truly pleasant apartment. She initiated divorce proceedings immediately and declined to talk about anything concerning paternity testing. Her attorney forwarded documents indicating she was forfeiting any entitlement to child support from me, which I suppose was meant to demonstrate her certainty that the baby wasn't mine. The divorce proceeded quite rapidly, as we had no children together and could divide our assets without excessive drama. Leslie continued sharing on social media about her happiness and her eagerness to commence this fresh chapter of her life. She would share pictures of her expanding belly with captions discussing trusting the universe and listening to your heart, those sorts of things. Russell appeared to be going along with the entire narrative. Based on what I observed on social media, he was pampering Leslie, taking her on weekend getaways to upscale eateries and purchasing pricey maternity attire for her. Leslie would share posts about how thankful she felt for having discovered someone who genuinely comprehended her and championed her aspirations. I endeavored to progress with my life. I concentrated on my job and began dating once more after some months passed. It was difficult because I continually pondered about the infant and if it could genuinely be mine, but Leslie had made her decision, and I had to honor that, despite believing she was utterly unreasonable regarding the entire paternity issue. The child arrived approximately 7 months ago, a baby girl they called Luna. Leslie shared all the usual new mother photographs and appeared genuinely content. Russell was in all the photos behaving as the proud father, and they resembled the ideal small family. I'll confess it was difficult to witness because a part of me still questioned what if, but I endeavored not to linger on it. But then, roughly 3 months prior, I received a telephone call from Leslie, and she was sobbing uncontrollably. Initially, I could scarcely comprehend what she was saying, because she was weeping so intensely. When she finally composed herself sufficiently to speak, she told me that Russell had arranged for a paternity test without informing her. Evidently, Russell had begun to question if he was truly the father, particularly as the baby didn't resemble him greatly. Leslie mentioned he had collected some of the baby's hair one day while she was asleep and submitted it to one of those DNA testing firms alongside his own specimen. When the findings returned, they indicated that Russell was unquestionably not the father. Leslie stated Russell confronted her regarding this and insisted on knowing with whom else she had been intimate. She assured him under oath that it had only been him and me. Therefore the baby must be mine in the end. But then Russell declared that if that were accurate, then she had to reach out to me and arrange a paternity test to substantiate it, as he refused to bring up another man's offspring. However, here's the astonishing aspect. Leslie still declined to get in touch with me concerning a paternity test. She claimed her intuition was signaling that something was amiss, and that perhaps the test Russell obtained was erroneous. She mentioned she still felt as though Luna was destined to be Russell's daughter, and that if they simply waited and believed in the universe, everything would resolve itself. Russell, it seemed, did not value this answer. He informed Leslie she had 7 days to ascertain the true father's identity and obtain proof, or he was finished with both of them. Leslie spent that week attempting to persuade him that the test was incorrect and that they should merely disregard it and persist as a family. But Russell was not amenable. Consequently, he evicted them. Leslie phoned me that day, weeping and inquiring if she could visit to speak. I told her no, because I wasn't going to be pulled back into her turmoil, particularly since she had declined to provide me any information about whether I might be the father when it truly counted. She pleaded with me to simply let her clarify the situation, but I stated she'd had numerous opportunities to be truthful with me, and she'd opted to rely on her intuition instead. Over the subsequent few weeks, Leslie persisted in calling and messaging me, requesting assistance. She mentioned she was residing with a friend, but couldn't afford her own residence without Russell's financial aid. She stated she was overwhelmed, attempting to care for Luna by herself, and that she simply required someone to help her resolve matters. I disregarded most of her messages because I concluded this was the outcome of her decisions. She had been so certain that Russell was the father, and that their spiritual bond held more significance than actual facts. So now she could confront reality independently. But then she began appearing at my home. The first time she arrived, she looked dreadful. She was holding Luna and had this enormous diaper bag, appearing as though she hadn't slept in days. She said she simply needed to converse with me and elucidate everything, and that she recognized she had committed some errors, but we could overcome them jointly. I informed her through the door that there was nothing to resolve, because she'd made her decision 18 months prior, when she determined her intuition was more dependable than a paternity test. She began to cry, claiming she was confused and frightened, and that Russell had pressured her to pick between him and me. But I wasn't convinced, since no one had made her turn down a paternity test. That choice was hers, based on her mystic beliefs about the father's identity. I informed her she ought to go and sort out her own issues. She kept returning, however. At times, she'd bring Luna, and at other times, she'd appear by herself. She'd wait on my porch, phoning me, pleading for me to simply open the door and speak with her. She claimed she was desperate and had nowhere else to go, and that even if Luna wasn't my biological child, we'd been attempting to have a baby for such a long time that perhaps this was the universe's method of providing us with a family. That truly angered me, because all of a sudden she wanted to discuss the universe's design when it suited her. When she believed Russell was the father, the universe had united them, and their bond was so profound and spiritual. Yet, now that he'd deserted them, all at once the universe desired her to return to me with another man's child. I warned her she had to stop visiting my home, or I'd contact the police for harassment. She stated she grasped my anger, but that Luna was an innocent infant requiring stability, and couldn't I at least think about assisting for the baby's benefit, even if I didn't wish to help her? The truth is, I did feel sorry for the baby, as none of this was Luna's doing. Yet I also wouldn't reward Leslie's poor choices by stepping in to save her when her plan unraveled. She had been so certain of everything when she was leaving me for Russell, so confident that her intuition was leading her to the correct choice. Now she could face the repercussions. After I warned I'd contact the police, Leslie ceased visiting my house for some weeks. But then she began telephoning me from various numbers when I blocked her usual one. She'd leave messages explaining her deep regret and how she understood she'd been mistaken about everything. She said she'd been undertaking some introspection and realized that her feelings for Russell had obscured her judgment, and that she should have managed the entire circumstance differently. In one of her voicemails, she confessed she'd been fearful of getting a paternity test, because at heart she was concerned that the baby might actually be mine, and that would have complicated her fantasy about escaping with Russell to lead this perfect life. She said she'd persuaded herself that her intuition was genuine, because it was simpler than confronting the possibility that she was committing a major error. But even with that confession, she still hadn't actually obtained a paternity test to discover whose child Luna truly was. When I phoned her back to inquire about that, she said she feared learning the truth, because what if Luna wasn't mine as well, and then she'd be utterly alone with nobody to assist her? I told her that was exactly why she should have taken the test in the first place, instead of making decisions based on her feelings. But she said she couldn't afford the test right now, and was hoping we could just try to work things out without needing to know for certain. That's when I realized Leslie hadn't learned anything from this whole situation. She was still trying to avoid taking responsibility, and still wanted other people to make choices, based on incomplete information. She wanted me to potentially raise another man's child without even knowing if it was mine, just because her other plan hadn't succeeded. Update 1. After my initial post, Leslie kept bothering me for another month, calling from different numbers and even having her sister contact me to try to convince me to help her. Her sister called me and said Leslie was truly struggling financially and emotionally, and that Luna was such a sweet baby who deserved to have a stable father figure in her life. She said I should consider that maybe this was all occurring for a reason, and that I could still have the family I'd always wanted, even if the circumstances weren't ideal. I told her sister the same thing I'd been telling Leslie, which was that I wasn't going to make any decisions about helping raise a child without knowing if it was truly mine. If Leslie desired my assistance, she first needed to obtain a paternity test, and if Luna proved to be my daughter, then we could determine how to responsibly co-parent. If Luna proved to be my daughter, then we could determine how to responsibly co-parent. However, Leslie's sister mentioned that Leslie was frightened the test results would be negative, and then she'd forfeit any possibility of reconciling with me. She stated Leslie had come to understand that I was the dependable, steady partner she should have selected from the start, and that she was wishing we might reconstruct our relationship based on trust instead of demanding scientific evidence. I nearly chuckled because it was the same unrealistic mindset that had led Leslie into this predicament initially. She'd relied on her gut feeling rather than facts regarding Russell as the father, and now she desired me to depend on her emotions over facts when it came to reuniting. She hadn't gained any insight. So I informed her sister that I was through with the discussion and that Leslie had to cease employing other people to try to coerce me into assisting her. I stated if Leslie wanted to have a mature discussion about obtaining a paternity test and determining the true state of affairs, she could call me herself. But I wasn't going to keep continuing these charades. That appeared effective for some time because the phone calls and visits ceased. I assumed Leslie had finally understood the message and was handling her issues by herself. I learned from mutual friends that she had returned to live with her parents for a period and was seeking employment. So it appeared she was at least attempting to get her life in order. But then about 2 months ago, I got a call from a number I didn't know. And when I answered, it was a man's voice, asking if I was Leslie's ex-husband. I confirmed and asked who was calling. He introduced himself as David and said he was calling regarding Luna's paternity situation. My initial thought was that perhaps Leslie had finally arranged a paternity test, and this was someone from the testing company, a lawyer or similar. However, David then explained he was calling because he'd recently discovered he might be Luna's father. I was utterly confused because Leslie had sworn she'd only been with Russell and me during the period Luna would have been conceived. David clarified that he'd been casually seeing Leslie for a few weeks, around that same time frame, and she told him she was separated from her husband and figuring out her next steps. Apparently, Leslie had met David on a dating app, and they'd hooked up a few times, but then she'd suddenly stopped replying to his messages. He mentioned he'd assumed she'd gotten back together with her husband or found someone else, so he'd moved on and hadn't thought about her again until recently. But then a friend had shown him some of Leslie's social media posts concerning Luna, and when he saw the baby's birth date, he realized the timing aligned with when they'd been seeing each other. He mentioned Luna had some distinctive features that reminded him of his own baby pictures, so he'd begun to wonder if there was a chance he could be the father. David stated he'd attempted to contact Leslie directly, but she wasn't replying to his messages, and he'd obtained my number from someone aware of our situation. He inquired if I could help him contact Leslie regarding a paternity test, explaining he was a responsible individual, and if Luna was his daughter, he wished to step up and do the right thing. This implied Leslie had been deceiving me about only being with Russell and me. She'd been involved with at least 3 different men during that time frame, possibly more, and she'd been manipulating all of us. The entire story about her profound spiritual connection with Russell and her intuition about him being the father was complete bullshit. I provided David with Leslie's current phone number and informed him he could try to contact her directly, but that she'd been avoiding accountability for this entire mess from the beginning. I cautioned him that she'd likely try to convince him that a paternity test was unneeded and that he should just trust her feelings about the situation. David seemed like a decent man and said he appreciated the heads up. He mentioned he had stable employment and his own place, and if Luna was his daughter, he wanted to provide for her properly instead of letting her grow up in an unstable situation. Several days later, Leslie called me, absolutely furious. She said I had no right to share her contact information with a random man, and that I was trying to sabotage her life because I was bitter. She said David was harassing her and demanding a paternity test, and that she didn't recall him clearly, because it had only been a casual encounter. I told her that was exactly the problem. She'd been casual with multiple men during that same time period, and then made life-changing decisions based on her intuition about which one was the father. Now there was a third possibility, and she was still trying to avoid getting actual facts about the situation. Leslie said she'd looked David up on social media, and he seemed like a decent enough guy, but she didn't want to complicate things further by adding another potential father to the mix. She said she was already overwhelmed trying to figure out how to co-parent with either Russell or me, and involving David would make everything more confusing. Mix. She said she was already overwhelmed trying to figure out how to co-parent with either Russell or me, and involving David would make everything more confusing. But I pointed out that she wasn't co-parenting with Russell because he'd kicked her out, and she wasn't co-parenting with me because she'd refused a paternity test to find out if Luna was mine. She was just drifting around avoiding responsibility, while others tried to do the right thing. That discussion concluded with Leslie hanging up on me, but it seems she did eventually agree to meet David. From what I learned later, David persuaded her that undergoing a paternity test was the fair course of action for everyone involved, including Luna, who deserved to know her true father. So they proceeded with the test, and what do you know? David was Luna's biological father. Leslie called me after receiving the results, and she sounded utterly defeated. She said she couldn't believe her intuition had been so mistaken about everything, and that she'd ruined her marriage and subjected Luna to all this instability for no reason. I told her her intuition hadn't been incorrect. She'd simply been deceiving herself because she wished to believe what was most convenient at the moment. When she wanted to rationalize leaving me for Russell, she persuaded herself that their spiritual bond meant he was the father. When Russell expelled her and she wanted me to take her back, she tried to persuade herself that perhaps the universe intended us to be together after all. But all along, she'd known there were other possibilities she was disregarding because they didn't align with the narrative she wanted to create for herself. David took action as he'd promised and assumed financial responsibility for Luna. He arranged his own paternity test to formalize it, and he began paying Leslie child support and taking Luna for visits. From what I see on social media, he seems like a good dad, and Luna looks happy and healthy. Leslie moved into her own apartment with David's help and got a part-time job, so she could care for Luna while still having some income. She stopped trying to contact me, which was a relief since I was tired of being drawn into her drama. Update 2. Well, I was mistaken about being done with this situation. Last month, Leslie showed up at my house again, but this time it was unlike her previous visits. She looked composed and calm, not desperate and crying as she had before. She mentioned she'd been in therapy and had some things she wanted to tell me, asking if I'd be willing to give her 10 minutes to talk. Against my better judgment, I let her in. Leslie sat down and explained she'd been working with a therapist to understand why she'd made such poor choices during our marriage and the entire affair situation. She stated her therapist had helped her realize she'd been struggling with some deep insecurities about not being able to get pregnant, and that she'd been seeking validation and excitement outside our marriage instead of confronting those feelings directly. She admitted she'd been selfish and had justified her behavior by convincing herself our marriage was already over. Leslie also acknowledged that her refusal to get a paternity test had been completely irrational and unfair to everyone involved. She mentioned she'd been so engrossed in the fantasy of her relationship with Russell that she'd overlooked obvious red flags and made choices based on wishful thinking instead of reality. I'll admit, this showed more self-awareness than Leslie had ever displayed previously, and it was good to hear her truly accept responsibility for her actions instead of blaming circumstances or other people. But I also knew Leslie was clever and manipulative, so I waited to see what she actually desired from me. She stated she wasn't attempting to get back together or asking me to help raise Luna, because she understood I'd moved on and that her behavior had burned those bridges. Instead, she wanted to make amends for the pain she'd caused me, and she was hoping we could eventually have some sort of civil relationship since we'd been such a significant part of each other's lives. That appeared reasonable enough, and I appreciated that she wasn't requesting anything concrete from me. I told her I was pleased she was getting help and taking responsibility, and that I hoped she could build a good life for herself and Luna moving forward. But then Leslie mentioned there was one more thing she needed to inform me of, and this is where things became strange again. She stated that during her therapy sessions, she'd been exploring her feelings about the entire paternity situation, and she'd realized that a part of her had been hoping Luna would turn out to be my daughter after all. Leslie mentioned that even though she'd believed Russell was the father, a part of her had been privately glad when his DNA test came back negative, because it signified there was still a possibility Luna could be mine and we might potentially reconcile. She stated she'd been let down when David turned out to be the real father. Not that David wasn't a good person, but because it signified she'd lost all connection to me permanently. She said she'd understood that I'd been the best partner she'd ever had, and that leaving me had been the greatest error of her life. I understood her direction and interrupted her before she could continue. I told her that I valued her candor, but that it altered nothing between us. She'd made her decisions based on what she wanted at the time, and now she had to face the repercussions. Leslie said she grasped that, but she wished me to know that if I ever chose to be involved in Luna's life as a friend or an uncle figure, she would welcome it. She said Luna was a wonderful child who would benefit from positive male role models, and that David was supportive of Luna having other caring grown-ups in her life. This seemed like another manipulation, honestly. Leslie was portraying it as generous and considerate of Luna's best interests, but in reality she was attempting to forge a path for us to remain connected. If I began spending time with Luna as an uncle, it would be natural for Leslie and me to eventually talk often and possibly develop feelings again. I informed Leslie I wasn't keen on that sort of arrangement because it would be confusing for everyone involved, particularly Luna. If Luna required positive male role models, she had David as her father and could form relationships with other family members and friends organically. Leslie appeared disappointed, but stated she understood. She thanked me for allowing her to apologize and expressed hope that someday I could forgive her for all the hurt she'd caused. Then she departed without any drama or pleading, which was honestly a relief following all her prior emotional manipulation. However, a few days later, I received a text from David asking if we could speak. He mentioned Leslie had informed him about our conversation, and he had some worries about the entire situation that he wished to discuss with me. When I rang David back, he stated he was concerned that Leslie was still not being fully honest about her motivations and feelings. He mentioned she'd been pressing for him to have a more romantic relationship with her, and when he'd made it evident he wasn't interested, she'd begun talking about how she wished things had turned out differently with me. David stated he was worried that Leslie was using Luna as a means to try to reconnect with me, and he didn't want his daughter to be caught in the midst of adult drama. He said he'd been quite clear with Leslie that Luna's connection with him was distinct from any feelings Leslie might have about other men, and he didn't want me to feel pushed to get involved just because Leslie was suggesting it. I valued David looking out for both Luna and me, and I assured him I had no intention of being pulled back into Leslie's orbit. I mentioned I thought it was best if Leslie, Luna, and I all kept to our separate paths moving forward. David concurred and said he was glad we were on the same page. He said Leslie was a good mom to Luna, but she appeared to struggle with accepting that some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, and he was trying to help her concentrate on moving forward instead of looking backward. This next one will make your jaw drop. I never imagined my marriage would end as it did, but now, as I write this, I can spot all the signs that led to that final moment when I packed my bags and walked out the door. My name is David, and I was married to Sarah for 8 years before everything fell apart. And the hardest part is that it all occurred right in front of her friends, who she cared more about impressing than protecting her own husband. Sarah and I met in college, and back then she appeared different from the person she later became. She was kind and supportive, and we shared the same dreams about building a life together, but at some point after we got married and bought our house in the suburbs, she began spending time with a group of women from our neighborhood who transformed her completely. These women were all married to men who earned considerably more money than I did, and they passed their days shopping, going to expensive lunches, and discussing their husbands' jobs and the money they spent on vacations, cars, and jewelry. Sarah began comparing our life to theirs, and she started acting as if she was ashamed of me and my job as a high school teacher, even though when we first got married, she'd said she admired how I wanted to help kids learn and grow. The group of women included Rebecca, whose husband was a lawyer, Jessica, whose husband owned a restaurant, Maria, whose husband was a doctor, and Linda, whose husband worked in real estate and made substantial commissions selling expensive houses. They would arrive at our house each Tuesday for what they termed their coffee club, but it was truly just an excuse for them to gossip, show off, and make one another feel inadequate about their lives. Initially, Sarah attempted to keep me away from these gatherings, asking me to stay late at school or run errands whenever her friends visited. But I began to notice she was different after they departed. She would become quiet and moody, making remarks about how we needed a larger house, or how I ought to seek a higher-paying job, and when I inquired what was amiss, she would simply say nothing and retire early. The first occasion I truly grasped what was occurring was roughly 6 months ago, when I returned home early from school because I had a migraine and needed to rest. I entered our living room and discovered all 5 women seated around our coffee table with their costly purses and designer apparel, discussing their husbands, how much money they earned, and the types of cars they drove. Sarah saw me enter, and her face flushed red. She then introduced me to her friends, even though I had met most of them previously at neighborhood gatherings. Rebecca scrutinized me and offered a greeting in a manner that made it plain she believed I was disrupting something significant, and Jessica merely nodded without truly looking at me. I greeted everyone and headed to the kitchen to fetch some water for my headache, but I could hear them speaking in hushed tones, and I overheard Sarah remarking something about how I was experiencing a difficult day at work. When I returned through the living room to go upstairs, Maria commented on how pleasant it must be to have summers off, like teachers do, and she stated it in a manner that implied I was lazy or that my job was effortless. I wish to clarify that teachers don't actually receive summers off, because we spend that time planning lessons, taking professional development courses, and many of us hold second jobs to make ends meet. But Sarah swiftly intervened and shifted the topic to discuss a new restaurant that Jessica's husband had acquired. I went upstairs, took some medicine, and attempted to sleep, but I kept pondering the way those women regarded me and how Sarah appeared mortified to have me present. After that day, matters worsened because Sarah began inviting her friends over more frequently, and she ceased trying to arrange their meetings when I wasn't home. It was as if she wished me to be present so they could all observe how much superior their husbands were compared to me, and she seemed to relish the way they disparaged me or entirely disregarded me when I passed through my own living room. The remarks began subtly, but they grew harsher over time. Rebecca would make jokes about how teachers likely don't grasp business or money, and Jessica would speak about how her husband purchased her costly jewelry, then glance at Sarah's wedding ring, which was modest because that was all we could afford when I proposed. Maria would mention how her husband worked extended hours to provide for their family, as if suggesting I didn't work hard enough, and Linda would discuss the expensive vacations they took and how crucial it was to experience the finer things in life. Sarah never defended me during these discussions, and sometimes she would even participate with comments about how we needed to be more ambitious, or how she wished we could afford to do more. She started talking about how her friends' husbands were so successful and driven, and she would sigh when she surveyed our house, which was perfectly pleasant but not as large or luxurious as theirs. The most difficult part was that these women would make these comments directly in front of me, as if I weren't even there or as if my feelings held no importance. They would discuss their husbands' promotions and bonuses while looking at me as if I were some sort of failure, and Sarah would nod along as if she concurred with everything they uttered. I attempted to speak with Sarah about how her friends made me feel unwelcome in my own home, but she would become defensive and claim that I was being too sensitive, or that I didn't comprehend how women communicate with each other. She said her friends were simply sharing their lives, and that I shouldn't take everything so personally, but I knew there was more to it than that, because I could see the way they looked at each other when they made their subtle comments. One day in March, the situation reached a breaking point that I still consider daily. I had arrived home from school early again, as we had a half day for teacher conferences, and I discovered the coffee club in full swing in our living room. They were discussing some charity gala they were all going to with their husbands, and they were detailing the costly dresses they'd purchased and the contributions their husbands were making to impress others at the event. I greeted them and headed to the kitchen to prepare myself a sandwich, as I hadn't eaten lunch, and I could hear them discussing me in the next room. Rebecca was mentioning how it was a shame that not everyone could afford to go to events like that, and Jessica chuckled and said something about how some people had different priorities in life. When I returned through the living room with my sandwich, Maria gazed at me and remarked that it must be pleasant to lead such a simple life without all the stress and responsibility accompanying a high-powered career. She spoke with a smile, but her voice held an edge, and Linda nodded and stated that some people were simply destined for different types of work. I felt my face grow warm, and I wanted to retort, but before I could utter a word, Sarah chuckled and said that she occasionally wondered what it would be like to be married to someone more ambitious. She said it like she was joking, but everyone in the room could tell she was serious, and her friends all looked at each other with knowing smiles. Rebecca then remarked that Sarah was so smart and beautiful a woman, and that she could likely have married anyone she desired, and she inquired if Sarah ever considered what her life would be like if she had made different choices. The room fell silent, and everyone looked at Sarah, awaiting her reply, and I stood there holding my sandwich, feeling as though I wished to disappear. Sarah looked at me for an extended moment, and then she glanced back at her friends and said that she tried not to consider such things because it wasn't just to compare. But then she said that at times she did wonder what it would be like to be with someone who could offer more opportunities and experiences. She mentioned she loved me, but that sometimes she felt as though we were constrained in what we could accomplish together, and her friends all nodded as if they understood precisely what she meant. Jessica then remarked that it was crucial for women to have partners who could match their degree of ambition and sophistication, and she commented that some people were simply naturally more driven than others. Maria further added that it was challenging to grow as a person when you were with someone content with mediocrity, and Linda stated that life was too brief to settle for less than what one truly desired. I stood there, hearing my wife and her friends discuss me as if I were some sort of charity case or a burden, and I felt something shatter within me that I don't believe ever mended. Sarah looked at me once more, and I could discern in her eyes that she truly meant everything she was saying, and that she had likely been harboring these thoughts for a long time without informing me. I placed my sandwich down on the coffee table and stated that I needed to go run some errands, and I departed the house without bidding anyone farewell. I drove around for 2 hours, pondering everything that had occurred, and attempting to determine when my wife had ceased respecting me and begun viewing me as something she was ashamed of. When I arrived home that evening, Sarah's friends were gone, and she was in the kitchen preparing dinner as if nothing had transpired. I asked her if we could speak, and she agreed, and I informed her that I had heard what she said about wondering what her life would be like with someone else, and how she felt constrained by being married to me. Sarah became defensive immediately, and stated that I was taking everything out of context, and that she was merely engaging in conversation with her friends. She claimed that women discuss hypothetical situations constantly, and that it didn't signify anything. But I could discern by the way she avoided looking at me that she knew she had overstepped a boundary. I told her that it wasn't solely about what she had uttered that day, but also about how she'd been treating me for months in front of her friends, and how she never stood up for me when they made their small remarks about my job or our way of life. I stated that I felt as though she was embarrassed by me, and that she would prefer to be married to someone like Rebecca's husband, or Jessica's husband, who could purchase her costly items and take her to lavish events. Sarah began to cry and said that wasn't accurate, but then she admitted that she did occasionally feel frustrated that we couldn't do all the things her friends could do with their husbands. She mentioned that she felt excluded when they discussed their vacations, shopping excursions, and elegant dinners, and that she wished we possessed more money so we could also experience those things. I told her that I understood she desired pleasant things and experiences, but that the manner in which she was managing her feelings was ruining our marriage. I said that her friends were exploiting her insecurities to make themselves feel better about their own lives, and that she was allowing them to turn her against me instead of speaking to me directly about what she desired. Sarah stated that her friends were simply successful women who comprehended what it meant to possess high standards, and that perhaps I should be more driven to better our situation instead of being content with our current state. She mentioned that all of her friends' husbands had strived to get where they were, and that perhaps I needed to push myself harder, instead of simply accepting that teaching was all I would ever do. That discussion continued for hours, and it grew increasingly heated as we both uttered things that we couldn't retract. Sarah kept defending her friends and saying that they were just trying to encourage her to want more out of life, and I kept trying to explain that they were actually encouraging her to want less of me. The following weeks were tense and awkward as we both tried to pretend that everything was normal, but I could feel Sarah pulling away from me more and more. She began spending even more time with her friends, coming home with stories about their husbands' latest achievements and purchases, and she would tell these stories in a way that made it clear she was comparing their lives to ours. The Tuesday coffee club meetings continued, and I began staying late at school or going to the gym to avoid being home when her friends came over. But sometimes I would arrive home while they were still there and overhear them talking about me in the kitchen or living room. They would make comments about how stressed or tired I seemed, and they would suggest that perhaps Sarah needed to find ways to motivate me to be more successful. One April evening, I returned home from a faculty meeting to find Sarah sitting at our kitchen table with a stack of real estate flyers and brochures for expensive cars and vacation destinations. She mentioned that Linda had provided her with some information about different ways we could improve our lifestyle, and she wanted to talk about making some changes to our financial situation. I reviewed the materials and understood that everything she was presenting to me required us to spend money we lacked or incur debt we couldn't manage on my teacher's salary. Sarah suggested that perhaps it was time for me to explore different career paths that offered better pay, or that I might get a second job so we could begin living more like her friends. I informed her that I loved teaching and was skilled at it, and that I didn't want to quit a job where I felt I was making a difference merely to purchase costly items to impress her friends. I stated that if she desired more money, perhaps she should consider finding employment herself, rather than spending her days shopping and having coffee with women who spent their time making others feel bad about their lives. Sarah became angry and replied that her friends' husbands did not expect their wives to work, as they earned sufficient money to support their families comfortably. She argued that it was unfair for me to expect her to find employment when I was the one who couldn't provide the sort of lifestyle successful couples enjoyed, and that perhaps the issue was my lack of ambition, rather than her having unrealistic expectations. That argument continued until nearly midnight, and by its conclusion we were both uttering things we knew would wound the other person as deeply as possible. Sarah stated that she was weary of feeling embarrassed when her friends discussed their lives, because she had nothing comparable to share, and I countered that I was tired of feeling like a disappointment in my own home because I couldn't compete with men who held entirely different careers and priorities. The next morning we hardly spoke to each other, and I could tell that something fundamental had shifted between us. Sarah seemed to have made up her mind about something, and she began acting as though she was merely waiting for the opportune moment to express her thoughts. That moment arrived the following Tuesday when I returned home early from school, because one of my students had been involved in a car accident, and I was too distressed to complete my afternoon classes. I entered our house and discovered the coffee club meeting as usual, but this time they ceased talking when they saw me enter, and I sensed they had been discussing something serious. I said hello and began to head upstairs, but Rebecca called out, asking me to return because they wished to speak with me about something. I understood from her tone that whatever they wished to say would not be pleasant, but I returned to the living room and stood by the doorway. Rebecca glanced at the other women and then at me, and stated that they had all been discussing Sarah's circumstances and were worried about her well-being. She stated that Sarah was such a wonderful woman who deserved a partner who could match her intelligence and potential, and that they felt she was being held back from realizing her full potential. Jessica interjected and said that they had all noticed how unhappy Sarah seemed lately, and that it was clear she was struggling with feeling unfulfilled in her marriage. She said that Sarah was too loyal and kind to say anything directly, but that it was evident to everyone who knew her that she required more from a relationship than what she was currently receiving. Maria then stated that they had been encouraging Sarah to seriously consider what she wanted out of life, and that perhaps it was time for her to evaluate whether she was with the right person for her future goals and dreams. She said that sometimes people grew in different directions and that it wasn't anyone's fault, but that it was important to be truthful about when a relationship was no longer working. Linda nodded and stated that Sarah was still young, beautiful, and intelligent, and that she shouldn't squander her best years with someone who couldn't give her the kind of life she deserved. She said that Sarah's friends all wanted what was best for her, and that sometimes that meant making difficult decisions about relationships that were no longer serving both people involved. I watched Sarah during this entire exchange. She was sitting on our couch, looking down at her hands, and she said nothing to defend me or tell her friends that they were out of line for talking to me like this in my own home. I waited for her to speak up and tell them to stop, but she simply sat there silently while her friends told me I wasn't good enough for my own wife. At last, I asked Sarah if this was how she felt too, and if she agreed with what her friends were saying about our marriage. She looked up at me and said she didn't know how to answer that question, but that she had been giving much thought to whether we wanted the same things out of life. Rebecca then stated that Sarah had been confiding in them about how trapped she felt in a marriage where she couldn't grow or experience the things she wanted to experience. She added that Sarah was too kind to hurt my feelings by saying it directly, but that she had told them she sometimes felt like she had settled for less than what she truly wanted when she married me. I felt as though I had been punched, and I looked at Sarah and asked her if she had truly said those things to her friends. Sarah began to cry, and she said that she had been confused and frustrated, and that she had said some things she probably shouldn't have said, but that her feelings were complicated and she didn't know how to sort them out. Jessica then said that Sarah deserved to be with someone who was in her league intellectually, and that it wasn't fair to either of us to stay in a marriage where one person felt like they were settling. She said that Sarah was an educated woman with so much potential, and that she needed a partner who could challenge her and provide opportunities for growth instead of someone who was content with a simple life. That phrase, "in her league," hit me like a slap across the face, and I realized that this was what all of those months of comments and conversations had been leading up to. Sarah's friends had persuaded her that she was too good for me, and that I was holding her back from some better life that she deserved to have with a more successful man. I asked Sarah directly if she thought I was below her league, and if that was truly how she saw our marriage. The room went completely silent, and everyone was looking at Sarah, waiting for her answer, and I could see her grappling with what to say. Finally, Sarah looked at me and said that she didn't think of it in terms of leagues, but that she did sometimes feel like we were at different points in our lives, and that perhaps we wanted different things for our future. She said that her friends had helped her realize that it was okay to want more out of life, and that perhaps we had both changed since we married in ways that made us less compatible. Rebecca nodded and stated that it was no one's fault when two individuals grew apart, but that it was crucial to be truthful about when a relationship had concluded. She mentioned that Sarah was young enough to begin anew and find someone who could offer her the sort of life she truly desired, and that I deserved to be with someone who valued the kind of person I was, instead of hoping I was different. I stood there hearing these women talk about my marriage as if it were some business that wasn't succeeding, and I understood that Sarah had already reached her decision. She had prioritized her friends' views over our relationship, and she had allowed them to persuade her that I was some form of burden or impediment to her happiness. I informed everyone in the room that I had listened enough, and that I didn't need to hear a group of women tell me I wasn't good enough for my own wife in my own living room. I stated that if Sarah believed she had settled for less than she merited when she married me, then perhaps we needed to have a serious discussion about what that implied for our future. Sarah's friends all glanced at each other with pleased expressions, as if they had achieved what they came there to do. And Rebecca remarked that sometimes the truth was difficult to hear, but that it was preferable to face reality than to live in denial. Jessica further stated that they were simply trying to assist Sarah in determining what would genuinely make her happy. And Maria mentioned that they all cared for Sarah too deeply to observe her waste her life feeling unfulfilled. I looked at Sarah once more and asked her if she wanted me to depart, so she could keep on discussing our marriage with her friends, or if she wanted her friends to leave so we could speak privately about what was occurring between us. Sarah glanced back and forth between me and her friends, and then she said that perhaps it would be better if I gave her some time to consider everything. That was the instant I realized our marriage was finished, because she had opted to request my departure rather than asking her friends to attend to their own affairs. I went upstairs and packed a bag containing enough clothes for several days, and I could hear the women downstairs speaking softly about what had just occurred. When I came back downstairs with my bag, Sarah was standing in the hallway, appearing perplexed and distressed. I told her that I was going to reside at my brother's house for a period so she could have all the time she required to reflect on what she desired, and that when she was prepared to converse, we could determine what followed. Sarah started to say something, but I raised my hand and informed her that I no longer wished to hear about how I wasn't adequate or how she felt confined in our marriage. I said that if she truly believed what her friends had been telling her, then we both deserved better than trying to make a relationship work when one person thought the other was beneath them. I went past the living room where her friends were still seated, and I could see them watching everything unfold with interest, as if they were enjoying the drama they had started. Rebecca called out, saying she hoped I understood they were only trying to help, and I stopped, turned around, and told her that ruining someone's marriage wasn't helping anyone. I told all of them that they had spent months entering my home and making me feel unwelcome and insufficient, and that they had turned my wife against me by persuading her that she deserved better than what we had constructed together. I said that they were the sort of people who couldn't be happy unless they were making others feel bad about their lives, and that I felt sorry for their husbands who had to live with women who were never satisfied with what they had. Linda began to say something back, but I was already heading toward the door, and I told them that they had achieved what they wanted, and that they could all pat themselves on the back by breaking up a marriage. I said that I hoped Sarah's new life with someone more deserving of her would make them all feel better about their own issues. I exited the house and drove to my brother Tom's apartment, and I spent the next 3 days trying to process what had happened and figure out what I wanted to do next. Tom was angry when I told him the whole story, and he said that Sarah's friends seemed like toxic people who enjoyed creating drama in other people's lives. Tom mentioned that he had never liked how Sarah changed after she began spending time with those women, and that he had observed at family gatherings how she appeared embarrassed by our modest lifestyle compared to her friends' circumstances. He stated that a good wife would have defended her husband instead of letting her friends attack him, and that Sarah had revealed her true character by choosing their opinions over our marriage. I called Sarah multiple times during those 3 days, but she didn't answer her phone, and when I eventually reached her, she said that she needed more time to think and that she wasn't ready to talk yet. I asked her if her friends were still coming over and giving her advice about our marriage, and she became defensive and said that she needed to talk to people who cared about her happiness. That conversation made it evident to me that Sarah wasn't planning to fight for our marriage or tell her friends to stay out of our business, and that she was going to let them continue influencing her decisions about our future. I realized that even if we resolved things temporarily, this same situation would keep happening as long as she valued her friends' opinions more than our relationship. I spent the next week reflecting on all the good times Sarah and I had experienced during our 8 years together and trying to determine if there was any way to save our marriage. I considered the woman I had fallen for in college who had supported my aspirations of becoming a teacher, and I questioned when she had begun viewing my career as something to be embarrassed about instead of something to be proud of. However, each time I thought about attempting to resolve things, I recalled how Sarah had sat quietly while her friends told me I wasn't adequate for her, and how she had asked me to depart instead of asking them to leave. I understood that the woman I had married was gone, and that the individual she had turned into under her friends' influence wasn't someone I could construct a life with. I scheduled a meeting with a divorce attorney who had been suggested by a colleague at school, and I spent 2 hours recounting everything that had transpired over the past several months. The attorney stated that what I was describing sounded like emotional mistreatment, and that Sarah's friends had essentially orchestrated a campaign to weaken my marriage and my self-esteem. He clarified that while we didn't have children or substantial assets to divide, I would still need to proceed with the legal process of filing for divorce and serving Sarah with documents. He mentioned that based on what I had shared, it seemed like Sarah might not dispute the divorce, since she had already indicated that she felt unfulfilled in our marriage. I signed the documents that afternoon, and the attorney said he would have them delivered to Sarah within the next few days. When Sarah received the divorce documents, she called me right away, crying and asking why I hadn't attempted to resolve things before taking such a drastic measure. I told her that she had made her position clear when she opted to discuss our marriage issues with her friends instead of with me, and when she had concurred with them that I wasn't adequate for her. Sarah said that she had never intended for things to progress so far, and that she had simply been confused about what she desired. But I told her that the harm was already done. I said that I couldn't be married to someone who viewed me as settling for less than she deserved, and that I couldn't live in a home where I was continually made to feel insufficient by her friends. She asked if we could attend counseling or try to resolve things, but I told her that the issues in our marriage weren't the kind that counseling could remedy. I said that the issue wasn't communication or misinterpretations, but that she had fundamentally lost respect for me and had permitted other people to persuade her that our life together wasn't sufficient. Sarah then stated that her friends had been trying to help her understand why she was feeling unhappy and that perhaps they had given her bad advice, but that didn't mean our marriage had to end. I told her that good friends would have encouraged her to talk to her husband about her feelings rather than encouraging her to think about what her life would be like with someone else. I explained that her friends had spent months making me feel unwelcome in my own home and undermining our relationship, and that she had participated in that process instead of stopping it. I said that a marriage couldn't survive when one person allowed outsiders to attack and belittle their spouse, and that I deserved better than what our relationship had become. The divorce process took about 8 months to complete because we had to divide our shared assets and figure out what to do with our house. Sarah ended up buying out my half of the house with money her parents lent her, and I used my portion of the equity to put a down payment on a small condo closer to the school where I taught. During those 8 months, I had very little contact with Sarah, except through our lawyers, but I heard from mutual friends that she was still spending time with her coffee club friends and that they were helping her through the divorce process. Some of these friends informed me that Sarah seemed relieved that the marriage was ending, which confirmed that I had made the right decision. I also heard that Rebecca had commented that Sarah was better off without someone who couldn't appreciate her worth, and that Jessica had said Sarah would have no trouble finding someone more suitable once she was ready to date again. These comments didn't surprise me because I knew that Sarah's friends were likely congratulating themselves on successfully breaking up our marriage. I moved into my new condo and began rebuilding my life as a single person, and I was surprised by how much happier I felt once I was away from the constant negativity and judgment that had taken over my marriage. I realized that I had spent months walking on eggshells and trying to prove my worth to people who had already determined I wasn't good enough, and that it felt good to be in a space where I could just be myself. About 12 months after our divorce was final, I encountered Maria at the grocery store, and she acted like we were old friends who hadn't seen each other in a while. She asked how I was doing and said that she hoped there were no hard feelings about everything that had happened, and she appeared genuinely surprised when I didn't respond with enthusiasm. I told Maria that I held her and her friends accountable for destroying my marriage, and that I thought they were manipulative people who enjoyed creating problems in other people's lives. She became defensive and said that they had only been trying to help Sarah determine what would make her happy, and that it wasn't their fault if our marriage had problems. I said that our marriage had normal problems that couples resolve together, but that her group had turned those problems into reasons why Sarah should leave me for someone better. I told her that they had spent months causing me to feel unwelcome in my own home and persuading my wife that she had accepted less than she deserved, and that their conduct had been cruel and destructive. Maria said that Sarah had been the one who approached them with complaints about our marriage, and that they had simply listened and provided support, like good friends should do. I told her that good friends would have encouraged Sarah to talk with her husband and address their problems together, rather than encouraging her to consider what her life would be like with someone else. That conversation ended with Maria departing in a huff, and I felt satisfied about finally telling one of those women precisely what I thought of their conduct. I knew that they probably all gathered later and discussed what a resentful person I was, but I didn't care because I was finished trying to earn their approval or demonstrate that I was adequate. About a year after our divorce, I heard through mutual friends that Sarah had started dating someone new, and that her friends were quite excited about him because he was an accomplished businessman who could give her the kind of lifestyle they believed she deserved. I felt a bit sad when I heard this news, but I also heard that Sarah's new boyfriend didn't especially like her friends, and that he thought they were too involved in her personal life, which made me smile because I knew that Sarah would eventually have to choose between keeping her friends happy and keeping her new relationship healthy. I wished for her sake that she would make a wiser choice this time around. Ultimately, Sarah's friends were right about one thing. We weren't in the same league, but they were mistaken about which one of us was settling for less than we deserved. Let's move on to the next story. So I've been with Carla for 3 years now, and we moved in together roughly 2 years back into this small apartment that was frankly a dump. But we made it work, and things were good. We split everything 50-50, even though I earn more than her. But that's fine, it's fair, and I never brought it up. She works and earns a fair amount, though not as much as I do, given I'm in tech and have been advancing my career for the past few years. Around 8 months ago, we began discussing buying a house together because rent was becoming excessive, and we felt we were essentially wasting money each month. I had also been saving for a down payment for some time, and with my really good credit score, I knew I could secure approval for a mortgage. Carla was enthusiastic about this, and we started browsing places online and visiting open houses on weekends. It was actually quite enjoyable initially, like we were truly planning our future together and everything. However, this is where things became complicated, and I'm still uncertain if I handled it correctly, though I believe I did. When we grew serious about actually submitting offers on houses, I consulted a mortgage broker. They reviewed all the figures and informed me that if I applied solo, I could get pre-approved for significantly more money than if we applied jointly, mainly because Carla has some student loan debt, and her credit isn't quite as strong as mine. Not poor, but simply not as strong. The broker indicated we'd likely be approved for around $350,000 together, but I could secure approval for up to $500,000 by myself. This meant we could consider much nicer homes in superior neighborhoods. I mentioned this to Carla, and she was initially upset, stating it felt strange that I'd be the sole person on the mortgage, and she'd lack any legal claim to the property. However, I clarified that my name being on the deed didn't mean it wasn't our house. We'd be living in it together and building a life, which was what truly mattered. Additionally, I highlighted that a $350,000 house would mean older properties requiring renovations or homes in less secure areas, whereas my higher pre-approval would allow us to acquire something truly lovely. She appeared to grasp the situation after my explanation, and we agreed to proceed with me applying for the mortgage by myself. I provided $75,000 as a down payment, which essentially comprised all my savings accumulated over years. Moreover, I had to cover the inspection, all closing costs, and other associated expenses. Carla assisted with some minor expenses such as the moving truck and a few new furnishings, but the bulk of the financial load fell on me. We discovered this ideal house for $420,000 in an excellent neighborhood, boasting great schools and a spacious backyard, everything we desired, and I secured the mortgage approval without issue. The entire process lasted roughly 2 months, and Carla was engaged in every step. We selected everything together, and she was equally enthusiastic about the house. Now, this is where I might be perceived as the jerk, but I genuinely don't believe I am. When we reached the closing, Carla inquired about being added to the deed. I reminded her that we had already talked about this and agreed I would be the sole person on the mortgage and deed due to financial considerations. She mentioned she understood that regarding the mortgage, but she believed she would still be included on the deed to have legal ownership of the house as well. I explained to her that it didn't make sense, as she hadn't contributed to the down payment or qualified for the mortgage. So why should she hold legal ownership of something she didn't finance? I mean, she's residing there and it's her home too, but legal ownership is distinct. If something were to happen to us, she could depart without any financial accountability, yet still possess half a house. That doesn't strike me as fair. She became very quiet and stated she needed to consider it. Honestly, I believe that was the conclusion, as my explanation seemed logical. However, over the subsequent weeks, she continued to raise the issue, saying she felt I was treating her more like a tenant than a partner, which is entirely untrue. I never requested her to pay rent or anything of that sort. We divided utilities, groceries, and household expenses, just as we always had. Then, about a month after our move, she mentioned wanting to contribute more toward the mortgage payments so she could build some equity in the property. I explained to her that wasn't how it functioned. The mortgage is under my name, based on my credit, and my sole responsibility. Thus, even if she contributes to it, that doesn't grant her ownership. Moreover, if she wished to allocate more funds to housing, she ought to prioritize paying off her student loans first, as those carry higher interest rates. This is when she completely lost her temper and began shouting at me, claiming I was being controlling and treating her like merely a roommate instead of my girlfriend. She asserted I was using the house against her and causing her to feel insecure about our relationship, which was absolutely not my intention. I was simply being pragmatic, regarding the financial and legal dimensions of owning a home. I attempted to soothe her and clarify that this altered nothing about our relationship. We were still partners and still constructing a life together. However, she persisted in saying I was making all the choices without taking her feelings into account. That's not accurate, because we selected the house together, and she was involved in every phase apart from the actual financial aspects. The situation grew quite strained between us for a while after that, and she began acting strangely regarding finances, like meticulously tracking exactly what she spent on groceries and household items, and making comments about how she was paying to live in my house. I informed her she was being ridiculous, and that she never behaved like this when we were renting and dividing everything equally. Then last month, she raised the idea of her parents assisting us with some money so she could be added to the deed. Her parents are pretty well off, and she said they offered to give her like $50,000 to put toward the house so she could have some ownership. I told her that was nice of them, but it doesn't work retroactively. I already bought the house, put down the down payment, and took on all the financial risk. So her getting money from her parents now doesn't change that. Plus, and this is where I might sound like an asshole, but I'm just being honest, I don't really want to be financially tied to her parents. If they give her money to put toward the house, then what happens if we break up? Do I have to pay them back? Do they get to have opinions about what we do with the house? It just complicates things unnecessarily. Carla got really upset again and accused me of not wanting to commit to our relationship, which is stupid because I bought us a house. How is that not commitment? But apparently, because I won't put her name on the deed, that means I'm keeping one foot out the door in case I want to leave her. I pointed out that if anyone should be worried about commitment, it should be me, because if we break up, she can just walk away, and I'm stuck with a $400,000 mortgage and a house I might not be able to afford on my own. She said that's exactly why she wants to be on the deed. So she has some security too, but that doesn't make sense because she didn't take on any of the financial risk to begin with. We've been arguing about this on and off for months now, and it's truly starting to affect our relationship. She brings it up every time we have any sort of disagreement and acts like I'm some kind of financial dictator. Last week, she mentioned she spoke with her sister about it, and her sister stated I was being unfair and that couples should share ownership of major purchases like houses. But her sister isn't aware of the whole situation. She doesn't know that Carla couldn't qualify for the mortgage on her own, or that I put down all the money for the down payment, or that I'm taking on all the financial responsibility. It's easy for people from the outside to say what we should do when they don't understand the actual circumstances. I love Carla, and I want us to work out, but I also think I need to protect myself financially. I worked really hard to save up for that down payment, to build up my credit score, and to get to a point where I could buy a house. And I don't think it's fair that she should get equal ownership just because we're in a relationship. Maybe I'm being too practical about it, but I've seen what happens when couples break up and there are big financial assets involved. It gets really messy and expensive, and I don't want to put myself in that position. If we stay together long term, then maybe we can revisit it, like if we get engaged or married or something, but right now, I think the way we have it set up makes the most sense. I know she's annoyed, and I understand why she feels uncertain about it, but I also believe she's being impractical about what she's due. Just because we're living together doesn't mean she automatically gains ownership of everything I buy. That's not how relationships function. So, am I the asshole here? Update 1. So, after I posted this and reviewed all the comments, I was actually beginning to feel guilty about the situation and considering whether I should add Carla to the deed, particularly after noting how many people thought I was being unfair. I was intending to discuss with her about maybe reaching some kind of compromise. But then yesterday morning, as I was getting ready for work, Carla was behaving very strangely, appearing nervous and jumpy, and when I inquired what was amiss, she said she needed to tell me something important. I instantly realized it was going to be troubling news because she had that look on her face, like when she's about to admit something. She told me that she'd been consulting an attorney about the property matter without telling me. not merely seeking advice from a lawyer, but actually deliberating with one about what her legal options are. She said the lawyer informed her that since we're not married, she doesn't have any legal right to the property, even if she's been contributing to utilities and groceries and residing there, which she already knew. But then the lawyer advised that she could create an equity stake if she could demonstrate her contributions to mortgage payments or home improvements. I inquired why she consulted an attorney without speaking to me beforehand, and she replied she wished to comprehend her entitlements before further discussions on the matter. But here's what truly bothered me. She said the lawyer informed her that if she begins contributing to the mortgage every month and we establish a written accord concerning it, she could potentially assert some ownership rights in the house at a later stage. So essentially, she was attempting to discover a legal means to compel me to grant her ownership of my property. I inquired if that was her intention, and she replied she merely wanted to understand her choices. But seriously, you don't consult an attorney unless you're intending to utilize the advice they provide. I told her I felt deeply betrayed that she went behind my back to seek legal counsel regarding our private affairs, and she said she didn't consider it secretive. She simply sought professional guidance. But why wouldn't she inform me she was doing that unless she was aware I wouldn't approve? Then she delivered the ultimate shock and said that her parents aren't merely proposing to give her funds to contribute to the house. They're prepared to lend her money to retain an attorney should she need to contest for ownership rights. I told her that this entire discussion was demonstrating precisely why I didn't want to include her on the deed to begin with, because now she's actively trying to find ways to legally compel me to grant her ownership of something she didn't pay for. She insisted that wasn't what she was doing, but the evidence showed otherwise. We had a huge argument about it, and she ended up leaving to stay at her sister's place for the night. I was truly relieved to have some space to think everything over, because I was so angry I couldn't even look at her. When she returned this morning, she apologized for not telling me about the lawyer, but said she still feels the whole situation is unfair, and she wants us to work out an agreement where she can start building equity in the house. I told her absolutely not, especially not after she tried to go behind my back and find legal ways to force the issue. She said I was being unreasonable and that she just wanted to feel secure in our relationship and her living situation, but I pointed out that she felt secure enough to try to lawyer up against me, so clearly she's not thinking about this like we're partners. I think what truly bothers me is that she's been planning this whole thing and pretending like she just wanted to have discussions about it when actually she was already talking to lawyers and getting her parents involved. If she had been honest about what she was doing from the beginning, perhaps we could have worked something out. But now I feel like I can't trust her. And frankly, reading through all the comments on my initial post made me realize that I was right to be cautious about this. So many people were suggesting I should simply add her to the deed to make her happy. But look what happened when I started considering it. She immediately escalated to lawyers and legal threats. I'm not adding her to the deed, and I'm not setting up any sort of equity sharing arrangement, especially not now. If she wants to own a house, she can save up for her own down payment and buy her own house. But she's not gaining ownership of mine through legal manipulation. I know this likely sounds harsh, but I feel as though I dodged a bullet here. What if I had added her to the deed months ago and then discovered she was this willing to involve lawyers and her family in our private affairs? I'd be caught in a legal nightmare trying to untangle everything. Carla is still staying at her sister's, and honestly, I don't know if she's planning to return or not. Part of me hopes she does, because I do love her and I want things to work out. But part of me is also wondering if this whole situation has revealed who she truly is when things don't go her way. I guess we'll see what happens, but I'm definitely not changing my mind about the house. Update 2. So Carla came back from her sister's place after 3 days, and at first things seemed okay. She apologized again for the lawyer thing and said she wanted to try to work things out between us without involving other people. I thought perhaps we could move past it and get back to normal, but I was wrong. She started acting quite strangely about money, keeping track of every single thing she spent in the house. For instance, she would photograph grocery receipts, note down how much she paid for cleaning supplies, and even meticulously track her portion of the electric bill down to the penny. When I questioned her actions, she stated she wanted to maintain records of her financial contributions to the household in case they became relevant later. I told her it was absurd and that she was being paranoid, but she replied that the lawyer had advised her to document everything if she intended to establish any kind of claim to the property. So, even though she apologized for consulting the lawyer, she was still following the lawyer's advice and essentially building a case against me. Then last weekend, her parents visited, and that's when everything truly went to hell. I knew something was amiss because Carla was acting nervous all morning and kept checking the time. And when her parents arrived, they immediately wanted to have a conversation with me about the house situation. Her dad began by stating they were concerned about Carla's security and future, and that they believed it was unfair she was living in a house with no legal protections. I explained the entire situation again about how I qualified for the mortgage and put down the down payment and took on all the financial responsibility, but he stated that didn't matter because we're in a committed relationship and should be building assets together. Then her mom chimed in and said they were prepared to give Carla money to contribute to the house so she could have ownership. And I told them the same thing I told Carla, that it doesn't work retroactively. But then her dad uttered something that really infuriated me. He said that if I wasn't willing to share ownership of the house, then perhaps I wasn't as committed to the relationship as they believed. I informed him that was absurd and that purchasing a house for us to live in together was actually a huge commitment. But he countered that keeping Carla off the deed was like keeping her as a tenant instead of treating her as a partner. I pointed out that she doesn't pay rent, and we split all the other expenses equally, so she's not being treated like a tenant whatsoever. But then Carla's mom mentioned that they were concerned I might kick Carla out or break up with her and leave her with nowhere to go, which genuinely angered me because I've never given anyone any reason to think I would do something like that. I told them that if they were so worried about Carla's housing security, then perhaps they should help her save up to buy her own place instead of trying to get ownership of mine. That's when the conversation got really heated, and Carla's dad said he thought I was being selfish and financially manipulative, and that if I truly loved Carla, I would want her to have security as well. I told him that was entirely unfair, and that I'd been only generous with Carla, letting her live in a beautiful house without paying rent and sharing all the benefits of home ownership without any of the risks. Carla barely spoke during this entire conversation. She simply sat there looking uneasy while her parents essentially attacked me. Eventually, I told them this was between me and Carla, and that I didn't appreciate them getting involved in our personal business, especially when they lacked all the facts. Her dad said that Carla had told them everything about the situation, and they understood it perfectly well, and that's when I realized Carla had been complaining to her parents about this entire thing, and probably making me sound like some kind of villain who was trying to control her. After her parents left, Carla and I had another big fight about it. I told her I couldn't believe she had been sharing our private business with her parents and making me look bad. And she said she needed support from her family because she felt like I wasn't listening to her concerns. I said that going to her parents and a lawyer wasn't asking for support. It was building a campaign against me, and she said that wasn't what she was doing, but I could see right through it. She was trying to get everyone on her side to pressure me into giving her what she wanted. Then she said something that truly showed me what this was all about. She said that if we ever broke up, she would have nothing to show for the years we spent together and all the money she put into our shared life. I pointed out that she would have all the money she saved by not paying rent over the years, plus all the experiences and memories and everything else you gain from a relationship. But she said that wasn't enough. That's when I realized this wasn't truly about fairness or security. It was about Carla wanting to ensure she gained something valuable from our relationship, even if it ended. She was essentially trying to treat our relationship like a business partnership, where she acquires assets irrespective of what she contributed. I told her that's not how relationships function, and that if she was already planning for our breakup, then maybe we shouldn't be together at all. She said that wasn't what she meant, but I think it was precisely what she meant. She wanted ownership of my house as insurance, in case we didn't work out. We've been hardly speaking to each other ever since, and the whole house feels strained and strange. Carla spends the majority of her time in the bedroom or at her sister's place, and when we do interact, it's just about practical matters like groceries or utilities. Frankly, I'm beginning to think this relationship might be over. Her decision to consult a lawyer, involve her parents, and attempt to build a case against me rather than simply discussing her concerns with me indicates that she lacks trust in me and disrespects our relationship. Had she approached me and expressed insecurity about her living arrangements and wished to establish some sort of agreement, perhaps we could have resolved something. Instead, however, she acted behind my back and sought methods to compel me to yield to her desires. And that is not how partners ought to treat one another. I'm relieved I discovered this now, rather than after we married, had children, or similar. At least in this manner, I can safeguard myself and my assets and avoid a complicated legal dispute down the line. Update 3. Carla departed yesterday, and frankly, I'm relieved, even though a part of me feels sorrowful about how everything concluded. But I know I made the correct choices throughout this entire predicament, and I'm pleased I relied on my instincts instead of heeding those who suggested I should simply yield to maintain peace. Thus, following my last update, matters only continued to deteriorate between us, and it became evident that we wouldn't be able to resolve this. Carla was hardly speaking to me, and when she did, it invariably concerned the house and her desire for some form of legal agreement regarding ownership or equity sharing. Roughly a week ago, she presented me with this document that she had evidently collaborated on with her lawyer. It resembled a cohabitation agreement that would grant her partial ownership of the house, contingent on her contributions to household expenses and future mortgage payments. She asked me to sign it and stated it would equalize things between us and provide her the security she required. I perused the entire document, and it was entirely biased towards her. It stipulated that she would acquire an ownership percentage based on her mortgage contributions, but it also declared that all her prior contributions to utilities, groceries, and household expenses would count towards her equity in the house, which was illogical because those are not house payments. The truly astonishing part was that it contained a provision regarding what would occur if we separated, and it stated that I would either be obliged to purchase her share of the house at its current market value, or we would be compelled to sell the house and divide the proceeds. Thus, she could essentially compel me to sell my house if we separated, and she opted for cash, rather than retaining her share. I informed her there was no chance I would sign that, and she responded that she could not remain in the relationship as she needed to safeguard herself financially. I replied that was acceptable to me since I was weary of being viewed as the villain for not granting her ownership of something she had not paid for. She said I was being stubborn and unreasonable, and that every couple she knew shared ownership of major purchases. But I told her that most couples who acquire homes together actually contribute to the down payment and qualify for the mortgage together, which she didn't do. Then she said something that truly revealed what she had been thinking all along. She stated that she had devoted 3 years of her life to our relationship and helped me become the kind of person who could afford to buy a house, so she deserved to benefit from that investment. I couldn't believe she was saying that, as if she were taking credit for my career success and financial stability. I told her that was absurd, and that I had worked hard to get where I am professionally and financially, and that being in a relationship with her didn't entitle her to the results of my work. She claimed that's not what she meant, but I think it was exactly what she meant. She felt like she deserved ownership of my house because she had been supportive of me during our relationship. But that's not how any of this works. Being a good girlfriend doesn't automatically make you entitled to your boyfriend's assets. We had one final huge fight about it, where she accused me of never really being committed to our relationship and just using her for sex, while keeping all my assets separate. She said she couldn't stay with someone who didn't see her as an equal partner, and I said that if being an equal partner meant giving her ownership of things she didn't pay for, then maybe we weren't compatible after all. So she started packing her belongings and called her sister to come help her move. It took her 2 days to get everything together, and the entire time she was acting like I was kicking her out, but I never asked her to leave. She made that decision herself. The night before she left, she tried one more time to persuade me to reconsider, saying that we could still work things out if I would just be willing to compromise. I told her that I loved her and wanted things to work out, but I wasn't going to be pressured into giving up legal ownership of my house, and that if she couldn't accept that, then maybe we weren't right for each other. After she left, I felt really empty and sad for a few hours, but I think I honestly dodged a bullet. What if we had gotten married, and then she decided she deserved half of everything I owned because she had been supportive during our marriage? What if we had kids, and she used them as leverage to get more of my assets in a divorce? At least now I know what kind of person she truly is when things don't go her way, and I can find someone who genuinely wants to be with me for me, instead of for what I can give them. Let's move on to another unbelievable story. My wife Claire and I have now been married for 8 years, and we share 2 children, a 6-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. We met during college thanks to mutual friends and began dating in our junior year. She was a very outgoing individual who seemed to know everyone on campus, while I was more of a quiet person, focused on my studies and rarely attending parties. I pursued engineering and she was studying business, and we somehow just clicked despite our notable differences. Initially, when we began dating, things felt wonderful, and I believed I was the luckiest man alive since she was completely out of my league. She was very attractive and popular, and could have dated anyone she desired, yet she chose me. I recall thinking perhaps she appreciated that I was unlike the other men she dated previously. She had stated on a few occasions that her former boyfriends were all of a similar kind, and that she desired something distinct, but she never truly elaborated on what that implied. Throughout our college years, our relationship remained positive, and we spent considerable time together, studying and socializing with friends. She would occasionally become moody or distant, but I simply assumed that was typical relationship behavior, and everyone has their ups and downs. Once we graduated, we both secured jobs in the same city and moved in with each other, and that's when I began to observe certain things that troubled me, yet I wasn't entirely sure how to address them. The first thing I noticed was that she never seemed particularly interested in being physical with me. I mean, we had sex, but it always felt like she was just going through the motions and wasn't truly into it. I tried talking to her about it a few times, but she'd just say she was tired from work or stressed by something, insisting it wasn't about me. I believed her because I didn't want to think there was anything amiss with our relationship, and I figured things would improve once we settled into our new routine. The second thing was that she seemed to get quite uncomfortable whenever we ran into people from college, especially guys she used to know. There was this one time when we were at a restaurant and she saw someone she knew, and she got all weird and fidgety, constantly looking around as if she wanted to leave. When I asked her who it was, she just said it was nobody important and changed the subject. But I could tell she was lying about something. The third thing was how much she cared about what her parents thought of everything we did. Her parents are very traditional and hold very specific ideas about what makes a good husband and father, and she was always concerned about making sure I measured up to their standards. She would coach me before family dinners on what to say and what not to say, and she would get quite anxious if she thought I might do something that would disappoint them. I thought it was nice that she wanted her family to like me, but in retrospect, it seems she was more focused on their approval than on what she truly wanted. After approximately 2 years of living together, I asked her to marry me and she accepted. But even then, the entire situation felt somewhat amiss. Upon giving her the ring, she appeared happy, but lacked the excitement I had anticipated. And when we announced our engagement, she would consistently concentrate on practical matters such as the wedding planning and schedule, rather than discussing her love for me or her eagerness to become my wife. The wedding planning was demanding, and we had numerous disagreements about various issues, but I attributed it to typical wedding stress that everyone experiences. Her parents were deeply involved in the planning and held strong opinions on everything from the venue and guest lists to the music, and she would always yield to their wishes, even though I knew her own preferences differed. The wedding itself was beautiful, and everyone appeared to enjoy themselves, but I remember feeling as though Clara seemed relieved once it was over, rather than happy that we were finally married. During our honeymoon, she was more relaxed than she had been for months, but she still seemed physically distant, and I began to wonder if perhaps she was simply not a very sexual person, or if there was something about me she didn't find appealing. The initial years of our marriage were acceptable, and we established a routine where we both worked and spent time with friends and family, making everything appear normal on the surface. We purchased a house and began discussing having children, and she seemed keen on starting a family. When she became pregnant with our first child, she was genuinely happy and excited, and I thought perhaps having kids would draw us closer and resolve whatever issues plagued our relationship. Having children did alter things, but not in the way I had anticipated. Clara became an excellent mother and was utterly dedicated to our children, but she seemed to have even less interest in our relationship as a couple. She would always be too tired or too occupied with the kids to spend time together. And when I attempted to plan date nights or romantic evenings, she would find excuses to cancel or shorten them. I began feeling like I was merely there to assist with practical matters such as paying bills and doing chores, and that she didn't truly need me for anything else. I tried raising my concerns a few times, but she would consistently say that having young kids was simply difficult, and that things would improve as they got older and required less attention. She would also highlight that I was being selfish for desiring more attention when she was already swamped with managing the house and children, and I felt guilty for even bringing it up. About 6 months ago, things started getting worse, and I noticed that Clara was spending much more time on her phone than usual. She would be scrolling through social media or texting others, and when I would ask who she was talking to, she would simply say it was her sister or a coworker. She also began going out more frequently with her girlfriends, and would get back home later than usual. And occasionally she would appear quite happy and energetic in a way I hadn't witnessed in years. I didn't want to be the sort of husband who was suspicious, so I attempted not to make a fuss about it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. She also began dressing differently and giving more thought to her appearance than she had in a long time. And when I complimented her on a new outfit or hairstyle, she would just brush it off and say she was simply trying to take better care of herself. 3 months ago, we had a very big fight about something silly, and during the argument, she mentioned that she felt like we were merely roommates who happened to have kids together and that she wasn't content in our marriage. I was stunned because even though I knew things weren't perfect, I didn't grasp that she was actually unhappy, and I asked her what we could do to mend things. She replied she didn't know and that perhaps we should try couples counseling, but then she never actually scheduled an appointment, and every time I mentioned it, she would say she was too busy or that she needed more time to think about it. 2 months ago, I discovered she had been browsing apartments online, and when I questioned her on it, she claimed she was merely curious about what was on offer in our vicinity, and that she wasn't truly intending to move out. She also mentioned that sometimes she simply enjoyed picturing what it would be like to reside somewhere else and that it held no significance. But I didn't believe her, and we had another significant argument regarding honesty and communication. Last month, the situation escalated when we were at her sister's birthday party and Clara drank far too much. She's not typically a heavy drinker, and I had never witnessed her that intoxicated prior, and I was growing concerned about her, so I repeatedly attempted to get her to moderate her drinking or eat something, but she simply continued ordering more drinks and laughing very loudly at every comment. Her sister's husband drew me aside at one point and inquired if everything was all right at home, because Clara had been messaging his wife frequently lately about being unhappy and feeling confined, and he was troubled about her. I informed him that we were experiencing a difficult period, but that we were addressing it. But internally, I was panicking, because I wasn't aware that Clara had been discussing our issues with other people. Towards the close of the party, Clara began becoming very emotional and clingy, and she repeatedly expressed to everyone how much she cared for them and how thankful she was for all the wonderful people in her life. I assumed she was simply being drunk and sentimental, but then she began discussing her college boyfriend and how he was the love of her life and how she still thought about him continually. I attempted to get her to stop speaking and proposed that we should head home, but she just persisted and stated that Dale was the only man who truly understood her and that she had made a dreadful mistake by letting him go. Everyone at the party was becoming uncomfortable, and her sister was trying to change the topic, but Clara wouldn't cease, and she began crying and saying that she had settled for a life that wasn't what she desired. That's when she looked directly at me and declared that she had never been attracted to me and that she only married me because I was safe and stable and because her parents approved of me. She stated that she thought she could learn to love me the way she loved Dale, but that it never occurred, and that she felt like she was living a lie. She also mentioned that she had been attempting to find Dale on social media and that she had actually contacted him a few weeks earlier to see if he wanted to meet up. I couldn't breathe, and everyone at the party was gazing at us, and I didn't know what to do. I managed to get Clara to the car and drive her home, and she lost consciousness in the passenger seat and didn't wake up until the next morning. When she awoke, she had an awful hangover and stated she couldn't recall anything from the previous night and inquired why I seemed so distressed. I recounted everything she had uttered, and she turned entirely pale and began weeping, apologizing and asserting that she was intoxicated and didn't intend any of it. She implored me not to take it to heart and stated that alcohol simply causes people to utter wild, untrue things, but I could discern from her expression that she remembered saying it and that at least some of it was accurate. I questioned her about Dale and if she had genuinely been attempting to reach him, and she confessed she had searched for him online and messaged him, but claimed he never replied and that it was merely a fleeting moment of weakness that held no significance. She vowed that she loved me and desired to make our marriage succeed, but I could sense she was merely uttering what she believed I wished to hear. I've been sleeping in the guest room since then, and we've scarcely spoken apart from matters concerning the children and domestic arrangements. She continually tries to raise the incident and wishes to discuss it, but I'm not prepared, and I'm unsure if I ever will be. Every time I look at her, I rehear those words about how she was never drawn to me and how she settled for me because I was secure, and I feel nauseous. The most difficult aspect is that now everything from our whole relationship becomes clear in a manner I wish it wouldn't. All those moments when she appeared distant or disengaged, all the occasions when she seemed uneasy with my college friends, all the instances when she worried more about others' opinions than her own desires, it all creates this image of someone who was never truly content with me, but was too scared or too focused on outward impressions to address it. I keep considering our children and how this will impact them if we divorce, yet I also don't know how I'm meant to remain in a marriage with someone who has faked loving me for 8 years. I feel as though our whole relationship has been a deception, and I'm unsure if there's any path to recover from that. Clara has been attempting to behave normally around the children, but I can tell they perceive something amiss, because they keep inquiring why Mommy and Daddy no longer sleep in the same room, and why we don't speak to each other as we once did. I've been striving to maintain things as normal as possible for them, but it's truly difficult when I can hardly bear to be in the same room as their mother. I also can't cease pondering this Dale fellow and wondering what he's like and whether Clara is still attempting to reach him. I searched for him online, and he's actually quite a respectable man who appears to travel frequently and shares photos of himself at eateries and gatherings, and I can understand why Clara might believe he's more thrilling than I am. I frequently ponder if she's contrasting us and wishing she had made other decisions. Am I the asshole for wanting to leave my wife after she confessed that she was never attracted to me and only married me because I was safe? I realized she was intoxicated when she uttered it, but drunk words are sober thoughts, and I don't believe I can ever move beyond understanding her true feelings for me. Update 1. To begin, I wish to thank everyone who commented on my initial post, because going through all the replies truly helped me understand I wasn't irrational for being upset by Clara's words. Many people noted that being intoxicated doesn't cause you to speak untruths. It merely makes you voice things you typically hold back, and that truly resonated with me. After I shared my post, I determined I needed to have a grave discussion with Clara about our marriage and what she had uttered that evening. I waited until the children were at school. Then I requested she sit with me in the living room, and I informed her that we had to discuss all that had occurred. She instantly began weeping and apologizing once more, stating she was so regretful for harming me and that she didn't intend her words. But I halted her and stated I required her to be entirely truthful with me for the first time in our relationship. I stated I deserved the truth about her actual feelings for me and our marriage, and that to have any hope of moving forward, she had to stop lying and making excuses. That's when she finally conceded that she had never felt the same physical attraction to me as she had for Dale and some of her college boyfriends. She mentioned that when we first dated, she thought attraction would grow, and she could learn to feel differently about me, but it never happened as she'd hoped. She also conceded she wed me partly because her parents genuinely liked me and thought I'd be a good provider and father, and their approval was truly important to her then. She stated she convinced herself that attraction wasn't the most vital thing in a relationship, and that our friendship and compatibility were more valuable than physical chemistry. The toughest part to hear was when she told me that, over the years, she had begun to resent me for not being more like the guys she used to date. Those more adventurous, spontaneous, and exciting. She admitted she knew it was unfair to blame me for being exactly the person I had always been, but she couldn't help feeling she'd missed out on something by settling down with me. When I questioned her about Dale and if she had been attempting to contact him, she became quite defensive and claimed it was merely a foolish error and that she was experiencing a midlife crisis or similar. But then I pushed her further, and she finally confessed she had been considering him for months before she actually made contact, and that she had been imagining what her life would have been like if they had remained together. She mentioned she had sent him a message on Facebook, informing him she had been thinking of him and inquiring if he wished to reconnect sometime, and that she had been checking compulsively for weeks to see if he would reply. She also conceded that if he had replied favorably, she likely would have met with him despite knowing it would be improper. Hearing all of this felt like being repeatedly punched in the face. But I'm relieved she finally told me the truth, because at least now I understand my position. I inquired if she wished to try to mend our marriage, or if she wanted a divorce, and she stated she didn't know, and that she was uncertain about what she desired. I informed her that I required some time to reflect on everything, and that I would stay at my brother's house for a few days, while I determined my next steps. She began weeping again and pleading with me not to depart, but I couldn't bear to be near her any longer, and I needed some room to process everything. I ended up staying at my brother's place for a week, and it was actually quite good for me to get away and clear my mind. My brother and his wife were very supportive, and they let me talk through everything without judging me or trying to tell me what to do. They also helped me understand that I deserved a partner who truly desired me and who found me appealing, and that remaining in a marriage where I was merely the convenient choice wasn't fair for either of us. When I returned home, Clara and I had another lengthy discussion, and I informed her that I believed we should divorce. She was surprised and mentioned that she thought we could resolve our issues through counseling and that she was prepared to put more effort into our marriage. But I told her that I didn't think therapy could fix the core problem that she wasn't attracted to me and never had been. She insisted that attraction wasn't everything and that we had created a good life together and that we should endeavor to preserve our marriage for our children's sake. But I told her that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with someone who saw me as a consolation prize. I also emphasized that our kids deserved to witness a healthy relationship and that remaining together solely for them would likely cause more damage than benefit. The conversation grew quite intense, and she accused me of giving up too easily and not being willing to contend for our family. But I told her that I had been fighting for our relationship for years, without even realizing that she didn't want the same things I wanted. I said that it was unjust for her to ask me to keep fighting when she had already emotionally disengaged years ago. Since then, we've been trying to sort out the logistics of separation and divorce, and it's been truly difficult and uncomfortable. Clara has been alternating between being angry at me for wanting to leave and being sad and apologetic about all that transpired. Sometimes she'll be cold and distant and behave as if the divorce is entirely my notion and that I'm acting irrationally, and other times she'll break down crying and plead with me to reconsider and give her another chance. The most challenging aspect is that I still love her, even though I understand that her feelings for me are not mutual. 8 years of marriage and 2 kids together doesn't simply vanish instantly, and there are still times when I question if I'm making an error by leaving. I've begun searching for my own apartment, and I'm trying to determine a custody arrangement that will suit all involved. Clara doesn't want me to move out and continually suggests that we should try separation counseling first, but I think that would merely be extending the inevitable and complicating matters for everyone. The entire situation is truly sorrowful, and I feel regret for our kids who are going to have to cope with their parents getting divorced, but I also feel like I at last possess some clear understanding about what I desire and require in a relationship. I deserve to be with someone who selects me because they genuinely desire me, not because I'm the secure choice that their parents sanction. I understand that some individuals will believe I'm being too severe, or that I should strive more to preserve my marriage, but I don't believe one can compel someone to be attracted to you or to love you in the same way you love them. Clara made her decision 8 years ago when she chose to marry me, even though she wasn't genuinely interested in me, and now I'm making my decision to seek someone who will truly desire to be with me. Update 2. Roughly a month has passed since my previous update, and I wish to inform everyone about recent developments because events have taken some unforeseen directions that I hadn't anticipated. I ultimately located an apartment and relocated approximately 3 weeks ago, and it's been a truly challenging adjustment for all parties concerned. The children are staying with Clara during the week and spending weekends with me, and they're struggling to comprehend why Mommy and Daddy no longer reside together. My daughter continually asks when I'll be returning home, and my son has been misbehaving at school and experiencing outbursts he never previously had. Clara and I are endeavoring to co-parent as effectively as possible given the circumstances, but it's quite awkward and strained whenever we must engage. She's still vacillating between being angry with me and attempting to persuade me to return, and it's emotionally draining to manage. Whenever I go to collect the kids or deliver them, she tries to initiate a discussion about our relationship, and I have to continually remind her that we're getting divorced and that I don't want to reiterate everything repeatedly. Approximately 2 weeks prior, an event occurred that further complicated the situation. I was at a shop close to my new dwelling when I encountered someone I knew from university, and it required a moment for me to grasp that it was Dale, Clara's former boyfriend whom she had been attempting to reach. He also recognized me and approached to greet me and inquire about my well-being. We ended up conversing for about 20 minutes, and he seemed like a truly pleasant individual, and not at all like the thrilling person Clara had portrayed him as. He's quite reserved, in fact, and mild-mannered, and is employed as an accountant for a modest company, and resides alone in an unpretentious apartment. He told me that he had received Clara's message several months prior, but that he hadn't replied since he's been in a committed relationship for the past 3 years and didn't consider it suitable. He also said that he was taken aback to hear from her because they had not maintained much communication since university, and their past relationship wasn't as grave or intense as she seemingly recalled it. He said that they saw each other for roughly half a year, and that it was quite informal, and that he had actually been the one to conclude it, because he felt they desired distinct paths in life. The discussion was genuinely eye-opening for me, because it helped me see that Clara had developed an entire fantasy about Dale and their relationship, one that wasn't based in reality. She had persuaded herself that he was this amazing guy who got away, and that her life would have been so much better if they had stayed together. But the truth was, he was just a regular person like me, and their relationship hadn't been that special or meaningful. I didn't inform Dale about what was happening with Clara and me because it didn't seem appropriate, but after we said goodbye, I felt this strange mix of relief and sadness. Once I got back to my apartment, I felt truly lonely and started second-guessing my choice to leave. I found myself pondering if perhaps I had been too hasty, and if Clara and I could have worked things out had we tried harder. I even started contemplating calling her and suggesting that we try couples counseling after all. However, the following weekend when I had the kids, Clara did something that reminded me why I had to leave initially. I was dropping them off on Sunday evening, and she invited me in for coffee and began discussing how much she missed having me around the house. She mentioned that she had been doing a lot of thinking and that she realized how much she had taken me for granted and how good of a husband and father I was. She also mentioned that she had been speaking with a therapist about our marriage and that she was beginning to grasp why she had been so unhappy, realizing it wasn't truly about me or our relationship, but rather about her own struggles with commitment and fear of missing out. She stated that she believed we could make things work if we both dedicated ourselves to being more open and honest with each other moving forward. For a moment, I nearly believed her, and I could feel myself being drawn back into the hope that perhaps we could resolve things and reconcile. But then she uttered something that made me understand she still didn't truly grasp it. She mentioned that despite never having felt the identical physical attraction to me that she had felt for other guys, she had come to appreciate other qualities about me, and that attraction might develop over time if we put in the effort. Her words made it evident that she still viewed physical attraction as something absent from our relationship, but that she was prepared to try to cultivate it for our family's sake. It wasn't that she suddenly understood she was attracted to me the whole time. It was that she was prepared to try to compel herself to feel something that wasn't innately present. I informed her that I valued her honesty, but that I didn't wish to be in a relationship where someone needed to strive to be attracted to me. I stated that I desired to be with someone who wanted me for who I truly was, not someone attempting to persuade themselves to want me. She became upset and claimed I was being unrealistic, arguing that all long-term relationships demand effort and compromise. But I informed her that certain things shouldn't need effort. We ended up having a significant argument, and I departed feeling more certain than ever that I had made the correct decision. Over the subsequent few days, I kept reflecting on what she had mentioned about learning to value other aspects of me and striving to develop attraction, and it made me feel even more as if I had been settling for crumbs in our marriage. I also began considering the fact that I'm only 32 years old, and that I hopefully have many more years ahead of me, and I don't wish to spend them with someone who views being with me as work they must undertake. I want to find someone who is enthusiastic about me, who finds me attractive, and who chooses to be with me because they cannot envision being with anyone else. Since then, I've been concentrating on getting settled in my new residence, establishing a routine with the children, and attempting to determine what I want my life to resemble going forward. I've been attending the gym more frequently, and I've been spending time with friends I hadn't seen often when I was married, and I'm beginning to feel like myself again in a manner I haven't in years. The divorce process is progressing, and Clara and I are working with a mediator to figure out custody and financial matters. She still harbors hope that I'll reconsider and return, but I believe she's beginning to accept that this is truly occurring. Her family has been calling me and attempting to persuade me to reconsider, but I've informed them that this is solely between Clara and me, and that their involvement isn't constructive. My own family has been immensely supportive, and they've mentioned that they could perceive my unhappiness in my marriage, even as I was striving to make the most of it. My mom stated that she always questioned if Clara was truly suitable for me, but that she didn't wish to voice it because it wasn't her role to intervene. It's strange to consider that others could discern issues in my marriage that I couldn't recognize myself. Now, let's move on to the last story. I'm 29 odd. I have a younger brother, Tyler, who is 26, and we were quite close when we were kids. Our parents always sort of favored him, though. He was like the golden child who could do nothing wrong, while I was simply the dependable older brother expected to manage everything and look after everyone. My parents are both in their early 60s now. My dad works construction whenever he can get jobs, and my mom has been a waitress at the same diner for about 15 years. We're certainly not wealthy, but we managed well enough when I was younger. Tyler has always been the kind of person who is charming and good-looking and can talk his way out of any situation, but he's never been good with finances or keeping a job. He's likely had 20 different jobs since high school and gets fired from most of them for not appearing or for having attitude issues with his supervisors. But my parents always made excuses for him, saying he was just trying to discover his path in life. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs throughout college, earned a business degree, and secured a decent job immediately after graduating. When I was 26, I met Olivia at a friend's birthday party. She was 24, worked as a nurse, and appeared truly sweet and grounded. We connected right away and began dating seriously quite quickly. She got along wonderfully with my family, which was important to me since family has always been a significant part of our home life. My parents adored her, stating she was perfect for me, and Tyler also seemed to genuinely like her. They would exchange jokes and playfully tease each other, but I figured it was just typical sibling-in-law behavior. Olivia and I became engaged after dating for approximately 2 years. We were both prepared to settle down and begin our lives together, and everything appeared flawless. We started planning the wedding immediately because we wished to marry the next summer. The issue, however, was money. Olivia's parents had both died when she was younger, and she was brought up by her grandmother, who had a fixed income, so there would be no financial assistance from her family. My parents said they wished to contribute, but could only manage perhaps $1,000, which I completely understood. So Olivia and I chose to save for the wedding ourselves. We both started setting aside funds every month, and I took on some freelance jobs on weekends to earn additional money. We opened a joint savings account specifically for our wedding costs, and we were both very disciplined about contributing to it every month. It felt good to be working towards this shared goal and watching the balance increase. However, my family situation began to grow more complex at this period. Tyler had been dismissed from another job and was residing with my parents once more, which was straining their finances. My dad's work was declining due to some back-related health problems. They were finding it hard to manage expenses, and I felt truly guilty, because I was doing well financially while they faced difficulties. So I began assisting them now and then. I'd purchase groceries when I visited for dinner, or discreetly give my mom some money when I knew they were late on payments. I likely provided help to them intermittently. I'd buy groceries when I came over for dinner, or slip my mom some cash when I knew they were behind on bills. I probably gave them a couple $1,000s over several months, but I didn't mind since they're my parents and I love them. Olivia was aware I was assisting them, and she was completely supportive, even though it meant we couldn't accumulate wedding savings as fast as we had intended. Tyler also knew I was helping our parents, and he began asking me for money directly at times. Typically, these were small sums, like $50 or $100 for fuel or groceries, and he always pledged to repay me. I knew he likely wouldn't, but I helped him regardless because he's my brother, and I didn't want him to suffer. Olivia wasn't as pleased about me giving Tyler money because she stated he needed to learn to be accountable for himself, but she didn't make a big issue of it. The strange part was that even though Tyler was supposedly broke and jobless, he needed to learn to be responsible for himself, but she didn't make a big deal about it. The odd thing was that even though Tyler was supposedly broke and jobless, he always seemed to have money for going out and buying things. He'd show up to family dinners with new clothes, or talk about going to concerts or bars with his friends. When I asked him about it, he'd say he was just being careful with his money, or that friends were paying for things. Around this time, I noticed that Olivia was acting a little different too. She seemed more distant sometimes, and she'd get strange about her phone as if she was concealing something. She started working more overtime shifts at the hospital, which I thought was great because it meant more money for us, but it also meant I was seeing her less. When I'd tried to make plans with her, she'd often say she was too tired from work or that she had already made plans with her girlfriends. I also noticed that she wasn't contributing as much to our wedding fund as she used to. When I asked her about it, she said that overtime shifts were taking a toll on her, and she'd had some unexpected expenses come up. She seemed stressed about it, so I didn't press the issue. I just started putting in more money myself to make up the difference. What really began to bother me was that Tyler seemed to know a lot about Olivia's work schedule and what she was doing. For instance, if I brought up that Olivia was working extended hours, Tyler would respond with something like, "Oh yes, she told me that." Or if I remarked that Olivia was socializing with friends, Tyler would know precisely which friends she was with. Initially, I considered that perhaps they were simply growing closer as prospective in-laws, which I believed was pleasant, yet something about it didn't feel right. One day I returned home early from work because I was feeling unwell, and I found Tyler sitting in my living room. This was unusual because I hadn't given him a key, and Olivia wasn't due home for hours. When I asked him what he was doing there, he said Olivia had let him in earlier because he needed to use the restroom, and then he dozed off on the couch. It appeared to be a logical explanation, but something about the whole situation felt amiss. I began paying closer attention after that, and I observed that Tyler's car was parked near my apartment complex more often than it should have been. When I asked Olivia about it, she said she'd encountered him a few times when she was arriving or leaving, and they'd conversed, but that was all. Again, it appeared logical, but I couldn't dismiss the feeling that something was amiss. The breaking point came about 6 months before our wedding was set to occur. I had been depositing additional funds into our wedding account because we were nearing the amount needed for the venue deposit, and I was eager to finalize all arrangements. When I checked our balance online, I noticed several significant withdrawals over the past few months that I couldn't recall making. I called the bank and learned that the withdrawals were made with Olivia's debit card. When I addressed her about it, she became very defensive and said she'd had some family emergencies arise that she hadn't wished to burden me with. She stated her grandmother had required assistance with medical expenses, and she'd had to withdraw funds from our wedding fund to assist her. I felt awful for questioning her honesty and apologized for challenging her on it. I proposed calling her grandmother to see if there was anything else we could do to assist her. I felt awful for questioning her honesty and apologized for challenging her on it. I proposed calling her grandmother to see if there was anything further we could do to assist. But Olivia became agitated and said her grandmother was ashamed of requiring assistance and didn't want anyone else aware of her financial difficulties. In retrospect, this should have been a major warning sign, but I loved Olivia and had faith in her, so I accepted her explanation. But then I observed that Tyler abruptly appeared to be more financially comfortable again. He'd relocated from my parents' home into his own flat. He owned a new vehicle, and he was constantly mentioning costly purchases he was making or destinations he was visiting. When I asked him how he was paying for all these things without employment, he said he'd been undertaking some informal work for a friend's business, and the work was plentiful. I wished to trust him, but the timing felt overly coincidental. Olivia was withdrawing funds from our wedding fund for family crises, at the same time that Tyler was abruptly abundant with money. I began to feel paranoid and remorseful for even entertaining my suspicions, but I couldn't dismiss the thoughts. So this is when the present situation began. Last month, I chose to surprise Olivia by organizing a romantic weekend trip for us. I'd been working extensively, and I felt that we hadn't been connecting as often recently, so I believed it would be beneficial for us to spend some meaningful time together. I reserved a pleasant hotel roughly 2 hours away and intended to surprise her upon her return from her shift on Friday evening. However, when Friday arrived, Olivia messaged me, stating she had to work a double shift and wouldn't be back until Saturday morning. I was let down, but I recognized that work takes priority, particularly since we required the funds. I opted to simply spend the evening at home and perhaps surprise her with the trip concept on Saturday instead. Around 10 p.m., I felt restless and chose to go for a drive to clear my thoughts. I wasn't intending to go anywhere particular, but I realized I was driving toward the hospital, where Olivia is employed. I assured myself I was merely going to check if her car was in the parking area, simply because I missed her and desired to feel linked to her in some way. However, when I reached the hospital, Olivia's car was absent. I circled the parking lot twice to confirm I hadn't overlooked it, but it was certainly not present. I began to panic and ponder if something had occurred to her. Perhaps she'd been summoned to an alternative location, or maybe her car was being repaired and someone had given her a lift. I remained in the parking lot for approximately 20 minutes, attempting to ascertain what to do. I didn't want to call her and appear to be checking up on her, but I was truly concerned. Finally, I decided to head home and await her contact. On my way back to my apartment, I chose a route that passed Tyler's new residence. I had no intention of stopping or anything. I was simply driving, lost in thought, not truly noticing my direction. But as I drove past his building, I noticed Olivia's car parked outdoors. My heart plummeted. I parked and remained there, gazing at her car, attempting to devise any logical explanation for its presence there. Perhaps Tyler was experiencing some sort of emergency, and Olivia had gone to assist him. Maybe her vehicle had broken down near his place, and she'd called him for aid. Yet deep down, I understood. I believe I'd known for months, but I'd been endeavoring to persuade myself I was merely being paranoid and envious without cause. I remained in my car for about an hour, simply gazing at Olivia's car, trying to determine my next move. Eventually, I decided to return home and wait. If Olivia was truly working a double shift, as she'd stated, then she'd be finishing work around 6 a.m. and would be home by 7. If she was doing what I suspected she was doing, then she'd likely arrive home sometime during the night with some justification about finishing work early. Olivia arrived home around 2 a.m. She attempted to be quiet, but I was awake, awaiting her. When she entered the bedroom, I inquired about her shift. She attempted to be quiet, but I was awake, awaiting her. When she came into the bedroom, I asked her how work had been. She mentioned it had been very busy, and they'd allowed her to leave a few hours early once things settled. I asked if anything noteworthy occurred, and she simply replied, "No, just the usual." I wanted to challenge her immediately, but I knew I had to be more strategic. If I was mistaken, I'd ruin my relationship and my family connections for no reason. But if I was correct, I required evidence before speaking. Any advice? Update 1. 2 weeks have passed. Many people requested an update, so here's what occurred after I created that post. I resolved to obtain solid proof before I confronted Olivia and Tyler, so I took some actions I'm not especially proud of, but felt compelled to take. First, I began monitoring Olivia's work schedule more closely. I called the hospital several times, pretending to deliver flowers or food to her, and discovered she wasn't working nearly as many of the shifts she'd mentioned. The times she stated she was working doubles, or picking up extra shifts, she often wasn't even scheduled to work at all. I also began scrutinizing our joint bank account more carefully. I configured notifications to be informed whenever money was withdrawn, and I began capturing screenshots of the transaction history. I discovered that Olivia was withdrawing cash quite often, typically in sums ranging from $200 to $500, and always from ATMs close to Tyler's apartment, or near places they were seemingly visiting together. What truly shocked me was when I inspected our wedding fund account and realized that we were missing almost $3,000. We were supposed to have about $12,000 accumulated by then, but only around $9,000 remained. When I examined the transaction history, there were numerous withdrawals that I certainly hadn't initiated, and these had been occurring for weeks. I was furious and heartbroken, but I still wanted to be completely certain before taking any action, so I chose to track them. I know how irrational that sounds, and I'm not proud of it, but I felt like I was losing my mind, and I had to uncover the truth. On the next occasion, Olivia mentioned she was working late. I waited for her to depart, then trailed her. She didn't go to the hospital. She proceeded directly to Tyler's apartment and remained there for hours. I sat in my car feeling nauseous, but it gets worse. As I waited there, I noticed my mom's car arrive. My mom exited and headed into Tyler's apartment as well. She remained for roughly an hour, and when she reappeared, Tyler escorted her to her vehicle, and they embraced, as if parting after a pleasant encounter. When she reemerged, Tyler walked her to her car, and they hugged, as if saying farewell after a pleasant visit. It was then I realized my parents were aware of the situation. My mom showed no surprise seeing Olivia's car, and Tyler made no effort to conceal anything from her. They were all complicit, and I was the sole person unaware. I returned home and didn't sleep at all that night. I kept thinking about all the times my parents had told me how perfect Olivia was for me, all the times they'd fostered our relationship, all the times they'd appeared so joyful about our engagement. They'd been deceiving me directly for months, while my brother and my fiancé were screwing behind my back and stealing money from our wedding account. The following morning, I resolved to stop playing games. I called Olivia and told her we needed to talk once she got home from work. She said she would actually be working late again, and I just said, "Fine, we'll talk tomorrow, then." However, I knew she wouldn't be at work. She was heading to Tyler's place again. So I drove over to Tyler's apartment in the middle of the day, knowing Olivia would be there. I didn't knock or anything. I simply used the spare key Tyler had given me and began recording. I walked directly into his bedroom and found them together. I won't elaborate on the specifics of what I saw, but it was precisely what I anticipated, and it still felt like a punch to the gut. They both began scrambling, attempting to explain, but I simply turned and left. I couldn't bear to look at them. I headed directly to the bank and shut down our shared accounts. I withdrew all the remaining funds from our wedding account, which, as I mentioned, was only about $9,000 of the $12,000 we should have saved. Then I went home and began packing Olivia's belongings. Olivia arrived home a few hours later and started to cry, apologizing and claiming it wasn't as it appeared. She said she and Tyler had merely been supporting one another through difficult periods, and things had grown complicated, but she loved me and wished to resolve matters. I informed her she had until the week's end to remove all her possessions from my apartment. Then I phoned my parents and informed them I knew the full truth. My mom began to cry, expressing her sorrow, but stated that Tyler had pleaded with them not to inform me, as he intended to break up with Olivia and tell me personally. She said they didn't wish to hurt me if it was simply a mistake that would soon conclude regardless. I told them that I didn't want to hear their justifications, and that I was finished with all of them. I said I never wished to see any of them again, and that they were all dead to me. My dad got on the phone, beginning to yell at me, stating I was being overly dramatic, and that family is family, and we resolve issues. I ended the call with him. That was 2 weeks ago, and I haven't communicated with any of them since. I know some people believe I was too harsh, but I just couldn't move past the betrayal. It wasn't simply that Olivia cheated on me, or even that Tyler betrayed me. My parents knew about it and lied to my face for months, while I was planning to marry someone who was sleeping with my brother and using the money we'd saved for our wedding. Update 2. I'm posting a small update to seek advice again, just like last time. About 6 months ago, things seemingly started going bad for all of them. Tyler lost his apartment because he had no money and had to move back in with my parents. Olivia got fired from her job at the hospital for some sort of policy violation. I'm not sure what that was. My dad's health problems worsened, and he can't work construction anymore. And my mom's diner, where she worked, closed down because of COVID, and she's been struggling to find another job. They've been trying to contact me through mutual friends and other family members. They've sent letters to my apartment, shown up at my work, and even contacted some of my friends, trying to get them to talk to me. The message is always the same. They're sorry for what they did, they want to make things right, and they need help. Last week, my aunt called me and said that my parents are likely going to lose their house because they can't make the mortgage payments. She said they're both too proud to ask me directly, but they're hoping I'll help them since I'm the only one in the family who's doing well financially. She said Tyler and Olivia aren't together anymore, and that everyone realizes what a mistake the whole thing was. I told my aunt I was sorry my parents were struggling, but it wasn't my problem. I said they made their choice when they chose to lie to me and help my brother steal from me, and now they have to live with the consequences. She said I was being cold, and that they are my parents, and I should help them no matter what happened. The truth is, I've been doing quite well for myself since I cut them all off. I'm seeing someone new, and things are going out wonderfully with her. I'm happier than I've been in years, and I don't miss the drama and stress my family always introduced into my life. I'm unsure. Am I being too cold? Update 3. Following my last post, I chose to maintain my boundaries and not assist my family, but they've been intensifying their efforts to get me to contact them, and it's beginning to impact my life in unexpected ways. Then Tyler began leaving voicemails on my work phone. I'm not sure how he got the number, but he was calling and leaving these long messages about how sorry he was, how he'd made a terrible mistake and ruined everything. He was crying in some of the messages, speaking about how he'd lost the best brother he'd ever had, and how he didn't know how to live with what he'd done. The voicemails were genuinely disturbing, because Tyler sounded like he was experiencing some sort of mental breakdown. He was talking about how he'd never deserved Olivia's love or my forgiveness, and how he wished he could go back and change everything. In one message, he mentioned he'd been contemplating harming himself because he couldn't bear the guilt any longer. I want to clarify that I don't believe Tyler was genuinely suicidal. I think he was attempting to manipulate me into feeling pity for him. However, the messages were still very upsetting to hear, and I was concerned that he might actually do something foolish. So I phoned my aunt and informed her about the voicemails. I stated that if Tyler was truly having thoughts of harming himself, then someone needed to get him professional help, but it wasn't going to be me. She said she would speak to my parents about it, and the voicemail ceased after that. But then Olivia began contacting my new girlfriend. I'm unsure how she discovered who I was dating, or how she obtained her contact information, but she began messaging her on social media and texting her. My girlfriend showed me some of the messages, and they were truly strange and manipulative. Olivia was telling my girlfriend that she needed to persuade me to forgive my family, because they were all suffering, and it was partly my fault. She said that I was a good person, but I could be stubborn and vindictive when I felt hurt, and that my girlfriend needed to help me realize that holding grudges was only harming everyone involved. She also said some quite nasty things about how my new relationship was merely me trying to replace her, and that I'd never be able to trust anyone else because of what she had done to me. She said my girlfriend should be cautious because I had trust issues now, and would likely become controlling and suspicious in all my future relationships. My girlfriend was quite distressed about the messages, as she felt Olivia was trying to undermine our relationship. She asked if I wanted her to reply to Olivia or simply block her, and I instructed her to block her on everything and not interact with her whatsoever. But Olivia attempting to meddle in my new relationship angered me more than anything else they had done. It was like she couldn't tolerate that I was moving forward and finding happiness without her, so she was attempting to ruin that as well. At this point, I learned further details regarding why Olivia had been dismissed from the hospital. Evidently, she had been stealing medications and selling them. A friend of mine working in healthcare informed me that Olivia was caught taking painkillers and other controlled substances from the pharmacy, and that an investigation was underway concerning how long this had been occurring. This clarified much about where a portion of our wedding fund money had gone. I had assumed Olivia was just giving the money to Tyler, but apparently she had also been using it to support a drug habit that I didn't even know she had. The more I learned about the truth of the situation, the more I realized that the person I'd thought I was in love with had never really existed. It was then that I chose to write them a letter. I know many people in the comments have proposed this, and I finally felt ready to commit my thoughts to paper. I devoted several days drafting and revising it, aiming to be clear about why I'd decided to cut them off and why I wouldn't change my mind. In the letter, I clarified that this wasn't about my inability to forgive cheating, and it wasn't about my pride preventing me from helping struggling family members. I stated it was about the fact that they had all betrayed my trust in the most profound way, and that they had shown me their loyalty wasn't with me when it mattered most. I wrote that when Olivia was taking our wedding funds to fuel her drug habit and her affair with Tyler, they could have told me and spared me months of planning a wedding to someone actively deceiving me. When Tyler was expending money, meant for my future, to finance his lifestyle and his relationship with my fiancée, they could have told me and spared me from continuing to lend him money, believing it helped him get back on his feet. I stated that their decision to protect Tyler and Olivia, rather than protecting me, had shown me precisely where I stood in their priorities, and that I could not have a relationship with people who had proven they would lie to me and watch me be hurt instead of doing what was right. I also wrote that I was not accountable for rectifying the consequences of their choices. I explained that they were adults who had chosen how to manage a difficult situation, and that those decisions had led to outcomes they now had to live with. I stated that I was not going to sacrifice my own well-being and happiness to rescue them from problems they had contributed to creating. Lastly, I wrote that I was happy and healthy and building a good life for myself, and that I was not going to let them destroy that by continuing to try to force their way back into my life. I said that if they truly loved me and wanted what was best for me, they would respect my decision and leave me alone. I mailed the letter to my parents' house and sent copies to Tyler and to my aunt on Gmail. I also included a note stating that this was my final communication with them, and that any further attempts to contact me or my girlfriend would be considered harassment and I would take legal action. It's been about a week since I sent the letters, and so far they seem to have gotten the message. I haven't heard from any of them, and my girlfriend hasn't gotten any more messages from Olivia. I am hopeful that this marks the definitive end of it, but I am also ready to obtain a restraining order if they begin trying to contact me again. I found out my fiancée was sleeping with my brother, using our wedding fund money, with my parents' knowledge. As a result, I left her and severed ties with all of them. I'm 29 memmies. I have a younger brother, Tyler, who is 26, and we were once very close as we grew up. However, our parents always somewhat favored him, treating him like the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was simply the responsible older brother expected to manage everything and look after everyone. My parents are now both in their early 60s. My dad performs construction work when he can find it, and my mom has been a waitress at the same diner for about 15 years. We are not wealthy by any stretch, but we managed fine when I was younger. Tyler has been a good father to me since I was a kid. He's been a good father to me since I was a kid. He's been a good father to me since I was a kid. He's been a good father to me since I was a kid. He's been a good father to me since I was a kid. Tyler has been a good father to me since I was a kid. Tyler has been a good father to me since I was a kid. Tyler has been a good father to me since I was a kid. Tyler has been a good father to me since I was a kid. Tyler has been a good father to me since I was a kid. Tyler has been a good father to me since I was a kid. Tyler has been a good father to me since I was a kid. Tyler has been a good father to me since I was a kid.